I think there's an argument to be made that Prince is the best import ever in LCS.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Summoning Insight. I'll make this quick. If you don't have money and you want to support us, like the video, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel if you want more stuff. If you do want more stuff, check out the channel. It'll have Power Spike. Tomorrow it'll have best, well, I don't know about tomorrow. I don't know. Probably 2 days from now it'll have Best Damn League Show. It depends if you're watching it. If you're watching the VOD tomorrow, it will be tomorrow. But 2 days from now, Best Damn League Show, which will be a banger. Spoiler, got a guess for that one. There's a little hint you only get by watching the shows. Obviously, there's all the other stuff. The bangers only, Monte and Wolf show came out recently. All sorts of content on there, all fresh. The shorts. We've got TikToks now. Yeah, that's right. Summoning Insight. You lived from 2014 when we were the most hardcore morphos of all time. Didn't even do the title. Didn't change the Twitch header. Didn't even have subs enabled. Didn't have anything. Just guys
might have been
waffling.
Drunk on the show if you're me.
Definitely. But now we got TikTok. Now look, let's be real. You're not going to the look. It's not like Monty's. They're like. It's not that TikTok. Not all the like, and there's definitely I'm not on the well. Now I say that I'll probably have to do this to make it funny. It's not me all going, I'm a bass bitch. And it's not me mouthing the words to like a rap song by like Megan Thee Stallion or something like that. It's mainly, esports related stuff like we do, like analysis of the games, clips and stuff. Anyway, check it all out. It'll all be in the description box below. Right. Obviously on this one, Monty, as well as, because we're back in our old groove, being able to cover any regions we want. Spoiler, we usually probably won't ever cover LPL because for that one we want experts and we want to be able to go deep and we're only watching the big matches. You obviously do your bangers only stream. We obviously cover the other major regions, right? I thought for this one, we'll primarily do LCS. We have a guest coming up later who's very relevant to that. Obviously LCK because it's just an amazing region. But there's a big old slice of that drama pie. Just the way Grandma cooks it. It's been sitting on the windowsill, Monty, all the heat coming off it with the window just up. And luckily, no passing by vagrant has come along and stolen it or anything, And now it's time to eat and feast upon that pie.
It took a couple days to cool, but it's cool enough now. And I
actually feel like now's the best time. Now's the best time to do it though, because if we'd have done this whole episode before they did the apologies, LeTigress herself, and obviously the LCS, I don't think it would have hit the same. So now essentially, in theory, the drama is closed, right? Now I know people are going, I wonder if under Thieves they'll do an interview with DoubleLift at the LCS. By the way, if he was to do anything beyond just make like a mild barb, he'd be bringing up the topic himself. Now, don't worry. He's stupid enough. He might do that. He is stupid enough. He himself, like, how dare you reference that? Might actually reference the same thing himself. Spoiler, that he's put on the internet in public tweets on hundreds of thousands of platforms. He makes it sound like she read his diary, by the way, and mentioned all that stuff. But okay, the drama goes like this, if people remember. When they were doing 100 Thieves featuring DoubleLift against TSM, because there is no narrative, I've complained about this for the last year, there is no narratives involving TSM. The only narratives are, do they abuse people? Do they steal money from people? And who was the biggest idiot of all the people who made all the bad mistakes? Like, nobody cares about the team's play. It hasn't been a relevant team. It's not that relevant a team now, if I'm being honest, even though it's actually not as terrible now. They've got some all right players, right? Now, because there was no narrative to hype up, I'll be with them. There wasn't. DoubleLift hasn't even played for the last year, right? The way they built a narrative was LeTigress took turns to do one of those monologues. She even, unfortunately, was a bit hyped about it. She even said, I've got this great monologue coming in. It was on Twitter, like the screenshot of the document, which that's aged poorly, I'm just going to say. Now, I will say before we start, I do actually think, as much as people meme on all these aspects of the broadcast, and they especially did in the online era, Monty, I will say before we start, I actually have absolutely nothing against LeTigress. Look, I don't think she's the best in the world. I think some of the people on LEC are better. But I actually think on that show, she's good, Monty. I actually do. One thing I do like is I never bought for a second that, like, Jack really was that hyped about, like, the best NA teams. I know he isn't, because I know Jack knows how good LCK and LPL is. I never really bought, like, put it this way, I do semi-buy that Freak did. I never really bought that, like, Mark C totally was in on them. He obviously does always the meme at wins and then he backs off when they lose. But I tell you what, I do believe. So she's either a great actress, Monty, or she fooled me, because I believe she actually is hyped about that broadcast. She does seem like she's genuinely enthusiastic about telling stories like super old fucking DoubleLift still playing the game. Still, she seems to be one of the few people who hasn't given up on that bloody broadcast, mate. Still trying to make it work, even though at this point it's a Sisyphean task of pushing the boulder up every hill and then never get to the end. You just do it every time. So with that said, look, obviously she made a faux pas, because what she did, she took the angle of the drama. Now, this is where there's so many angles we can go into, but basically, she just pointed out, like, DoubleLift had his beef against TSM because he had that thing where he's got like a lawsuit, and then TSM were coming back and being like, oh, you lied about this, and we're going to like wreck you in return. And then stupidly, because the lawsuit was related to the idea that people were abused within TSM, I will say, not sexually, as far as anyone knows. I know people take that term, it's shorthand. We just mean abused as workers. It was it sounds like an unacceptable work environment, and maybe people were exploited. Spoiler, if you even just looked into some of that stuff with the Peter Zhang and the contracts, it seems to me, as a non-legal expert, like actually the way they even operate in California doesn't make sense. Remember all those reports about like people were doing overtime and being told, like, come in on this day, all the things that you can't do with a freelancer legally in the state of California, by the way. But I will say, that is the whole esports industry. TSM was just a worse version of that. They were just getting away with the loophole. Now we'll start. That's the facts of the matter, right? So she did this monologue like that, and unfortunately, it was very poorly received. DoubleLift himself flamed it in a tweet, flamed it on his stream, sort of like said something, oh, how dare they do this? Leena went on Reddit. She was battling against them. And basically, these people, TSM, Leena, DoubleLift, TSM in general, demanded that they get some kind of apology, right? The fans in general, look, I wanted an apology in the sense of like, I just think you missed it. It was a bad angle, never should have taken it. You missed I just thought it was more like, we fucked up, sorry. And then obviously the one, well, we'll get to all the details. There's the facts. I want to get where you're starting on this one. Where did you start when you first heard this story, Monty?
I mean, so I think that what starts to annoy me about this entire affair is that at the most basic level, I just hate the concept in esports and traditional sports, by the way. Traditional sports are super guilty of this, of pretending that an entirely different group of people is responsible for things that happened in the past.
Oh, right, the other way around, right? Okay,
right. So it's like, you know, it's this whole team of players and coaches, and we know that Reggie has been forced to basically recuse himself from the League of Legends team, and you know, the LCS and the LCSPA set up this player hotline to make any kind of complaints if they need to about the work environment at TSM. But from the LCS perspective, the team that DoubleLift played on, I mean, Leena's gone now, right? And she was the one who brought him over from Team Liquid in the first place. I mean, the conflict of interest there was absolutely insane at the time, and I don't think that trade should have ever gone through, in my opinion.
And it's the holy war.
And I tweeted that at the time. But I think like making a rivalry comparison when I don't think DoubleLift has any particular beef with any of the people that are on TSM right now is just a fake ass rivalry.
Yes.
It's like saying that, you know, in traditional sports that the team that existed 10 years ago with literally an entirely different roster of players is somehow a through line to the main team. That is a cheap narrative. It would be like
saying that, like, when the Warriors play the Cavaliers now, you're conscious to when they had like LeBron and Kyrie Irving. Exactly. They don't have any of those players anymore. It's a totally different team.
So, you know, it's one of those Ship of Theseus problems, except we just,
which is a common problem in League. We always complain about the T1 one where they act like it was the same team from years ago. So it's an obviously common problem.
Right. I mean, at least Faker's always been there, right? So there at least is some level of comparison. But this is a sad ass way to do narratives, and it's a sad ass way to do rivalries when you don't even need that. I mean, I think the more interesting storyline here would have been to talk about DoubleLift's time on TSM, because for the through line is for the fans, right? It's like, oh, the fans used to be fans of DoubleLift who were TSM fans. Look at him on 100 Thieves now, and he's coming back to beat up on the team that you're a fan of. That's the actual narrative, right? And for me, dragging into this, so there's several big mistakes with this segment. One of which is, as you said, there was a law firm doing an investigation into whether Reggie attacked people based on their protected classes in the United States and the state of California,
which is illegal.
Which means, for those of you who don't know, was he bullying people based on their race or their age or their sexuality or their religion, right? These are all protected classes. Turns out he wasn't. He was just...
Reggie's just a common or garden asshole. Exactly. You know?
He's an asshole to everybody.
Yes.
And so they didn't find any instances where he was bullying people based on protected class. So he wasn't actually in violation of any law. And so now I don't know the intricacies of the partnership agreements that the teams have with Riot, but they couldn't really do anything to him because of the legal contract between the two entities. And the way they punished him was by not giving him a Valorant partnership. So they did punish him pretty severely, I would say. They basically cut him out of Valorant, and they cut TSM. In the same way that the G2 was ultimately punished for what Carlos did. So I think that they made some pretty strong statements in addition to their rather weak fines, but they used the mechanisms that they had within League of Legends and then punished them in a different way. And so for me, that was like the first problem is, why are you trivializing something that was really serious to a lot of people? And people did, in fact, suffer emotionally and verbal abuse at the hands of Reggie. And like, is that something we need to drag into a game rivalry? Right? It just seems like a pretty big downplaying of it. The other thing that pissed me off, as somebody who lived through this era, was her saying basically that the old Game Cribs episodes where Reggie is on camera verbally abusing the players to the point that they
like a screenshot
cry.
of one of them, the one where he's in the car when they were having the subways, and Wild Turtle's looking at him like this, and he's going, Wild Turtle's the whole reason that we lost the game. He's brilliant, and he's like right there, like that one, that classic clip.
By the way, if you go back and watch that game, Reggie completely runs it down, and it's definitely Reggie's fault.
It's definitely his fault.
So it is incredibly his fault. And so he is like completely talking shit to Wild Turtle.
It's a tantrum.
I mean, it is appalling, and it was appalling at the time. And by the way, Riot did nothing at the time. This was happening in and around the first LCS studio in 2013.
He's never been punished ever. Remember, people used to, DoubleLift was once fined for punching himself. Like, Reginald was never fined for this behavior, ever. I think High wasn't fined by Riot. Was it right? Remember when High did that and got like it was either Cloud9 or Riot fight again. Cloud9. But Reggie just kept skating. Everyone knew this was going on.
Yeah, everybody, and they were putting it out, and it was getting tons of views on YouTube, and Riot was well aware of it. Did they do anything? No, they thought it was perfectly fine. Everybody involved thought, and like, I was saying this is fucked up at the time.
For sure.
And nobody.
But everyone just said, nah, it's because you're with CLG, Monty. You are salty. you're the one that's aged the worst, guys. You're just jealous of Reggie because he has Leena and all those millions of dollars. Like, well, only one of those two is correct anymore. So I think he's jealous of himself now.
I'm not a person who's super motivated by money. So whatever. So there was that angle to it where she said like, oh, that's just ancient history. And like, for me, it's not. Like, it's an incredibly integral part of this story and a really regrettable part of the esports scene, and especially the young League of Legends scene at the time. And I don't like that behavior just being swept under the rug. And she also didn't live through that, so she's probably not the right person to be talking about that particular incident, because she wasn't around and doesn't understand really the impact of that or what was going on in the scene. So that rubbed me the wrong way too. So I think she was just the wrong person to go back that far in time when she wasn't there, especially when there are people literally on that broadcast, people like Jat, people like Kobe, that were there. They were there at the time. You know what I mean?
Remember, add this detail in, Monty. We all know LCS is not the broadcast where someone's going on stage doing an impromptu speech. This is just like the Frostgrove one. This was run up the pipe. This has gone to people who oversee the content and the edit. People have approved this to get on the broad. That's how that broadcast works. It's a very controlled broadcast, I've heard.
Yeah, I think probably less. They changed producers, so I think I don't know exactly the way it's working right now.
At least one person must have improved it.
At
least
one. Yeah. I mean, multiple people obviously looked at it. They rehearsed it, right? They rehearsed it. Like there were dozens of people who were involved in this, and said it was okay. Now, all of this said, I think it was irrelevant in that the players. It's not really a rivalry because DoubleLift isn't against anybody that he was against previously. I think that it was a tasteless dismissal of things that happened in the past. I think it was kind of a flippant study of something that happened very recently that they never addressed on broadcast, really, by the way, very seriously. So they never did a serious treatment of the Reginald investigation, which took months and months and months and months last year. So yeah, all of that was just kind of garbage. But I will say this. I'm glad they're taking risks. I mean, the fact that we're actually...
yes.
Look, I mean, as crazy as it might be to say, this is a new direction for the LCS. And I would much rather, and I said this on this show, I would much rather swing and have them swing and miss sometimes than just be garbage and boring like they were the entirety of the last like 10 years. Right. So occasionally they're not going to do the best thing. But I think that they have improved pretty significantly and they have been much more interesting this year. And as much as we might hate this, this was a strong choice and it was interesting at the end of the day. And as I said on Power Spike, this is probably the first time that LeTigress has ever done anything interesting, which, not a good review, I think, of her overall.
Yeah, I would just say in the sense she just played it safe before. She was just doing a generic host of an esports event before. Yeah, it was a scandal. Remember, here's the saddest thing if you're someone like her, by the way. You would have gotten away with that for the first 6-7 years of LCS. The games used to carry the broadcast. It wasn't about some magical bells and whistles and LEC, and there was none of that. Right, I'll get into some of my angle now.
Anyway, I'm glad she's putting herself out there is the point. And I hope that she doesn't. I don't want her to get discouraged by this because I think that you can learn from this and you can actually put yourself out there more now and people are paying attention to you. And I hope she uses this moment to double down.
All right, so first things first, the main issue, I agree, the taking chances is fine. Even referencing things outside the game might not be terrible, but you have to be careful of the tone and what the content of what you're talking about is. So if this had been, they just shit-talked each other on Twitter, but about the fact that DoubleLift used to be in TSM, or even, by the way, being honest, they did make it public, even if like Reggie and DoubleLift had publicly battled about the fact that they both have dated Leena, even if that was the angle, you would actually potentially be okay to, that's right behind the line because they've made all that public. That is a storyline people care about. The problem here is the tone was light-hearted. Like she said, this is ancient history. It's not ancient history when you have documented on-camera abuse, dozens of examples. By the way, I knew the guy who was the cameraman who made that documentary. He told me, you want to see what hit the fucking cutting room floor, mate. When you have that scene where they're in the studio and they fuck up in game, then suddenly Reggie's berating, especially he's crying. I was told I chopped loads out of that. I couldn't just make like half the episode him just abusing a guy to tears. So they knew this was all going on. This is all in that tiny season 3 studio.
Yeah,
it's all on camera.
That same producer told me the same thing. He said they had to cut it and edit it in a way to make it look better because it was so bad, right? That was the good version that you guys saw. The bad version, I mean, what you didn't see was even worse than that.
The implication there when you say is ancient history is like it's not relevant. The reason why this lawsuit is happening is because that is literally relevant. That is documented evidence of it. That's almost the genesis point publicly of where we get Reginald being this type of character. By the way, we'll get to this in a minute. Leena was there the whole time. She was never telling stories behind the scenes, by the way. She never said anything. Never went to a big journalist, as far as I'm aware. Never even attempted at the time to even help with this. But we'll get to that. So then the next point is this, right? Even if you wanted to address drama like that, I still think it would be a bit flippant. But that's mainly because you're Riot. You're the broadcast. They wouldn't on the NFL bring up some crazy, outrageous thing. And of course, let's see Deshaun Watson, because a lot of people think that he actually might have abused many women in the offseason. So he was turned down by a lot of teams. Will he be hungry for this game, do you think? When he thought he might have gone to prison? That would be mental for the NFL. But here's the thing, guys, the NFL doesn't do the broadcasts, do they? So here's a very key distinction I want to make. If this was Fox doing the LCS, they can do it. They're an independent news organization who are covering it as third-party people. If this was ESPN, if this was whatever, CBS, whatever network, whatever channel you want, that's okay. You're Riot Games. And also, you Riot Games and you've made it that LCS is buttoned down and you get fined for that. Exactly, that's terrible. Then let's add this in here, right? When you are Riot Games, don't ever talk about anyone abusing their employees, you fucking cretin. Read the room. That just shows you the gall of whichever producer approved this, Monty. Because Riot Games got away with abusing the women. You might go, no, they didn't. You had to pay the fine. First of all, they attempted allegedly to sabotage the fucking fine so it would be less. Also, they didn't go to a normal court, so we didn't get all the information. It was done in arbitration, a thing that if you ever go and look at Richie Lewis's content, is intentionally intentionally designed essentially to protect the companies by lawyers. It's why they get you assigned at the beginning. And then let's add in one more detail in that regard, right? No executive was ever fired, ever stepped down, ever did a true mea culpa that cost anything more than words. And they paid for a little charity thing, and they let people stand outside with a placard, and people pretended that changed the whole culture of a company. It didn't. It didn't in any way. You don't turn a steamboat round in one day. It doesn't work that way. So this is the other thing we want to get into now, which is when you're going to talk about this topic of DoubleLift and Leena, the idea you need to apologize to them. By the way, the TSM one's mental because they even made it sort of like, it sounded initially like you have to apologize. It sounded initially like people wanted apologies to all of TSM. Well, we're obviously not apologizing to the people who abuse people. So that's off the table. So I wouldn't ever say apologize to TSM. I'd say like any of the people involved in that abuse. By the way, if that includes DoubleLift and Leena, then they would include them. But I don't know about necessarily entirely like that. The problem with the DoubleLift angle was this, is as I said, DoubleLift himself put all that info out there in public. Now, true, maybe he doesn't want it on LCS broadcast, but don't act like it's like some secret, though, man. Like, everyone does know this. In fact, you're the one who was the one who did it. And here's my problem if you build into this. I don't say that DoubleLift and Leena weren't abused by Reginald. But one, they never let on in any context, as far as I'm aware, until they left, and it financially benefited them and public relations-wise benefited them to make Reggie the bad guy. In fact, before that, let's be real. If you ever brought this stuff up to them, public, they would have laughed it off. They would have deflected it. They'd have spun it on some, they hate us because they hate us because we're TSM angle. Leena herself, by the way, for years, she was the president of TSM. The word president means you preside over. That means everything that happens there is your purview, and it's not your fault. You didn't do the action, but it's your responsibility. When you find something's happening, if you're the president, then you have to take care of it. Now, you can't go, but it's the order. No. You're the president. You are, by definition, one of the most powerful people in the company. You can, at a minimum, send that info to journalists. By the way, you don't even need to do Richard Lewis and me anymore. One, Travis Gafford's fucking DoubleLift's best friend. He's a journalist, homie. You can't tell him about this shit. Another person you notice is never whispered a fucking peep about TSM Reggie, even though he knew what was going on the whole time, because he knows where the fucking purse strings are, mate, and he knows he doesn't want TSM fans downvoting all those videos and telling him he's fucking cancelled. So he said nothing for 10 years too. More people that were adding to the list. Then let's go on to this angle. If you were Leena, you could even in the modern day, because it's already happening, have contacted that guy who, look, if you ever read his Twitter profile, it's an absolute nightmare. I'm waiting for this guy to do a terrible woke story soon. That guy with the Eastern European name who works for the Washington Post who wrote these stories, you can reach out to him. And this is the worst detail of all, because they're trying to imply now that Leena was part of the abuse, or that she either, she knew about it and she just consoled, but she didn't help anyone though. Here's the problem with that. You're part of the investigation, surely. Why didn't you tell Riot all that happened to you? You either lied and didn't tell everything to Riot. If that's true, by the way, you have no business later claiming abuse. Because now you're not even in his grips anymore. That's the thing, Monty. If someone's like a beaten woman in a house or something, obviously I understand why you might be fear for your life, why you fear for your children. There's other reasons. She's out. She's gone. If you don't know, guys, she's not even unemployed. She has a very good job for Sentinels, one of the biggest orgs in Valorant, one of the bigger esports orgs with massive funding. I heard she could have joined a bunch of big teams, by the way. This is someone doing very well in their career.
In offline TV for a while before moving jobs. She's had plenty of career opportunities. So, I mean, I think to your point, this issue with Leena is that I think there should always be an open door, and maybe this is the thing that pushes her in the direction of talking to a journalist. I don't believe in condemning people forever, but I do think that when you are presiding over this for a decade, right, as you say, you are fully aware of it. You are literally dating the guy doing it for a good chunk of the early part of this. You are living in the house in Long Island, and you are living in the house with the LCS team in Los Angeles at the start. And look, she was really young, and maybe, she started very young in esports, right, as a literal teenager. And so I think maybe over time,
she's now 29 years old, man.
Yeah.
29-year-old adult woman who was the president of a company valued at $500 million by Forbes magazine. Stop doing this shit, guys. Leena and DoubleLift and fans, stop doing this. Where, on the one hand, if someone dared to say, seems like nepotism maybe is why you got your job. Did you ever do anything at TSM? That would be an outrageous statement. I've never made it. But if you were to say, Oh, you were the president of the company, then you presided over it. You must have known these things. Oh, no, I wasn't. I didn't do any of that. Every time something bad happened, she never did it. Here's why it's mental, by the way, that she never reached out to people. Because I've heard from my contacts, I've done content on this, that she poaches players for TSM, including in League of Legends. That means she even can go through back channels. I've heard all sorts of stories about when she was in charge. The joke is everything that happened at the end, she took credit for. I got these players, I got the Fortnite guys, I got DoubleLift, I got this. Suddenly she does everything except everything Reggie does. She not only doesn't do that, she wasn't involved. She saw it, so she knew they were abused. She never seemed to help them, never seemed to. Magically, all your power's gone. What is it? Are you this powerful? Like, wow, she's showing women like you can lead the industry and be a top figure. I don't know if she was ever in one of those lists, like Forbes 30 under 30. I mean, I imagine she probably was. It'd be the sort of thing you'd be in.
She was.
Which is it? Do you get the credit and the acclaim? Because here's the thing: credit like that comes with responsibility. Power comes with responsibility. You actually have. I'm being serious. I think she genuinely, because she was the president, had a responsibility of care to those players and staff. And when you saw Reggie was doing that, you should have allowed. Here's the thing, Monty. You should have been the one raising the alarm bells years ago. Even as you say, if you were young, okay, when you get to say 25 and you're the president, now you should be raising the alarm bells. You should have started this process with Riot and the press years ago. Instead, what did you do? You didn't. You let the valuation of TSM go up and up and up. You collected, I'm guessing, a nice big fat 6-figure contract, probably equity as well, all along the way. You got your boyfriend gig in the team. You left. Are you ready? This is the detail, has to be inserted because this context shows that I don't believe everything DoubleLift and Leena is in good faith. Here's why, Monty. Because the story goes, at the end of 2020, DoubleLift did want to play in TSM still. Yes. And he had that thing where he asked for that one player from Vietnam and then instead they were Sword Art and they didn't think it was going to be Sword Art. And then he left and then they got Sword Art and Reggie thought, this is my chance to fuck DoubleLift and he, fuck you, homie, you ain't coming back. And I heard, remember I said that on Someone Insight and everyone was, you're not quite correct there, Thorin. About a year later, the whole story came out. It was exactly as I said. Spoiler. That's because I can't read my source. You idiot. I have to pretend I'm speculating. I'm just the best speculator of all time.
So the way this went, guys, was that there was supposed to be Sword Art in the team. DoubleLift said he would join with Sword Art joined after Sword Art was in the World Finals. Sword Art then didn't look like he wasn't going to join for a while, so DoubleLift pulled out. Yep. Then Sword Art ended up signing the contract, and DoubleLift was like, "Oh, I'm back in now." And Reggie was like, "Fuck you! You gave me the runaround. You don't get to be in this team."
But then the problem is this. Then, so DoubleLift's not in TSM anymore, and now he's a huge streamer, right? He takes the year off, right? When he's taken the year off and he's a huge streamer, this is as Leena starts to exit TSM.
Here's the drama. That's exactly people to his stream.
That's exactly when all the information gets dropped. So essentially, it's worse than you think, guys. If they really believe this was abuse of employees and people they dearly cared about, including the president turning a blind eye, it's worse, guys. They used that abuse as a bargaining chip to increase their own status. And I'm just going to say it now. If DoubleLift plays in TSM in 2021, I don't think he ever says any of this stuff. I've even heard other stories about they could have made another lineup with all them in the next year after that. The whole thing's outrageous because it just looks like the joke is they're the people who don't seem to take the abuse seriously. It's like those stories I tell you about the virtue signalers. It's worse, Monty. It's not that a virtue signaler pretends to care about someone or no, it's not that the virtue signaler cares, but then when they realize it's a cost, they're like, I can't pay the cost. No, they never did care because they never were going to pay the cost. So what they actually do when you virtue signal is you take the life of a protected class or someone who's vulnerable and you say again, I'm just going to use this for personal gain until it doesn't gain me and then you're done. So you're basically a puppet. You're a tool of that person. You actually show you don't. It's the worst than that. You show that they're just a commodity to be used. Like this was just a chess piece for DoubleLift. I mean, the joke there is he could barely play checkers. Could he be trying to? I've got 5 on top of each other. You know how he is, mate.
But no, I totally agree with you. I mean, the timing was extremely suspicious. It did, in fact, drive significant viewership to DoubleLift's content because people were hanging on his every word to learn more about the drama, and he was getting written legal letters, which it was funny that he put on Twitter, I will admit. Like, it was obviously just a bullshit attempt, and like, I would do the same thing if I were him. And it's very hard to separate. I mean, it's annoying because I think what he did was right, but I think he did the right thing for the wrong reasons.
Yes, that's a good way to say it.
So I'm not him. I know him. But I'm not him, and I can't be in his head. But there's nothing to make me believe that either of these people is truly doing these things because they cared about the abuse. And even now, it feels like they're doubling down on, like, why the fuck are DoubleLift and Leena making Twitter posts about this segment? This segment was bad, but it's like Everybody knows it's bad. There isn't a confusion among the audience or the fans that it was bad. People are already annoyed by it. The apology was already made. So why are you doubling down on somebody who is literally apologizing for doing the thing that you're upset about? And it really didn't affect you. It's not like it cast DoubleLift in a bad light. Nobody came out of this segment thinking, I think worse of DoubleLift now as a result of this. Nobody, it was never throwing any shade at DoubleLift whatsoever. So why is he pissed off? In a way, they're still trying to cover their asses for the weird circumstances. And this is clearly like a PR move to be like, oh yeah, we were the good guys the whole time. But everybody knows you weren't the fucking good guys. You were a bystander watching bad shit happen and saying nothing for 10 years. And some people are going to spin this back at me and say, well, Monte, you owned a team and bad things happened. Yeah, I was also punished for it. I was punished very severely, right? And while I disagree with the severity of that punishment, I do agree that I shared some level of responsibility over that situation.
You're the owner, yeah.
There you go. Like, you know what I mean? I shared some level of responsibility. Do I think I was punished overly severely given the things that I knew and the things that I did? Yes, of course I believe that. But this was something that was allowed to happen for 10 years with actually zero punishment, right? And that's the difference.
I'll give you another angle as well. Look, it's one that's mine only, but I can't believe, Monte, I don't want to play this game where we can cancel people, but some people are uncancelable just because they're popular. So here's the obvious one. Monte, you remember this. In 2020, I showed that the TSM YouTube channel, the main channel with all those bazillion subscribers, had vlogs on it, and one of them featured Reginald, literally the owner of the team. Still, in 2020, the video was up until I pointed this out, saying what Riot themselves would describe as an anti-LGBT slur. Now, did Riot ever punish him when I put this video out? Pointed out the video was there? No. They never mentioned it or addressed it. Did Riot ever, during the 10 years, figure out, are there any dodgy things on these channels? Did Leena, who, by the way, is part of what she's credited for is the content strategy and all the setting up of the shows. Did she ever do anything about it? Did TSM ever do it? All those people who care in TSM, they ever do anything? No. The joke is, let's be real, Monte, because that video is sold, that video would be on their YouTube right now if I hadn't brought it up. Right now in 2023. So that's the org that TSM was. They never cared about any of this.
I can just tell you, as somebody who had conversations with Reginald during that time, that he could barely speak 2 sentences without dropping an F-bomb. And, you know, Leena was dating him. Like, it was all there, guys. It was all there.
Yes. I think that's about it, right?
I mean, look, I think that, this issue, I think that the fans at least appear to have a sober and clear-eyed take on this one, which is that this is a pretty fraudulent attempt to like shame LeTigress. And I do think it's ridiculous that LeTigress apologized to TSM. Like, what the fuck? You didn't even do any damage to TSM. What? Some people who work at TSM are upset because they tried to change the company culture. You didn't fire Reginald. Okay? It's the same shit with Riot. They didn't fire anybody. Now, you can be mad, but you yourself are deluded if you are working for Riot or TSM and you think that real changes occurred. They did some bullshit changes, but they didn't actually change the leadership of the company that was causing these problems, okay? So you kind of, I don't feel sorry for you. You kind of deserve to feel bad about working for Riot or TSM. That should constantly be on your radar that, hey, I like this job and I like collecting this paycheck, but there's some real shitty people at the top. And working this job is going to come with that criticism. So you can't be righteous and you can't act butthurt when it happens.
The saddest thing is, I've said this on the show many, many times, not only were we spun to be crazy conspiracy theorists who just had an irrational beef against Reginald because he hosted a tournament over Monte in season 2 and because he blacklisted me from interviews, even though he later did interviews and shows. That was the angle that was told to us when we pointed out this abuse for 10 years. By the way, same with Richard Lewis, he pointed out all the Riot stuff for years and years and years. You all told him he's a liar, he doesn't know anything about esports, he's making it up because he's banned from Reddit. Spoiler, everyone who said that, you all carried water for people who abused people, sexually abused them. You carried water for people who abused employees. And then the other thing I'll say is this, the only people behind the scenes at TSM who used to actually admit, yes, Reggie's an arsehole and did these things, were the odd player who had a set of balls. That's it. There's not that many. There'd be 4, 5, 6 of them. And even then, most of them, it was like a cult. They'd then quickly, like, it's like the sort of mantra would kick and then they'd go. But then again, though, Reggie did take care of me and he did give me like a golden handshake at the end. And they just go into this like thing where they disassociate and just explain how brilliant he was and make him sound awesome. And the joke is like, even players like staff, no one was ever leaking this. No one ever said it. In fact, the premise was, this is the environment, the work culture within the company Leena presided over and was winning awards for, being hailed and lauded for. The premise was, if you were actual employee and you said any of this shit, not only would it be over at TSM, they'd probably kill your career in esports because they know all the other org owners, they know Riot, they have all the sponsors. The last thing they want to do is piss off TSM. In fact, I'll be real. The whole reason I think Reginald specifically never was fined or punished, even though I said CLG used to get fines up the ass all the time from the Callum. We all know those fucking stories. Monty's had fines. A whole bunch of people have had fines. But the reason why TSM and Reggie were never punished is because TSM were number one back then. They were the FaZe clan of League of Legends. Reggie was the main figure along with Hotshot, and Hotshot wasn't even a good player anymore. Like, the joke was they did love them some Reggie, and they were willing to turn a blind eye to it. And everyone turned a blind eye like this. And then, as usual, when it comes out, everyone's clutching at their pearls. Oh, how could it happen? Because you all let it happen. Remember that famous saying, the Edmund Burke quote, I suppose he misquoted, like, all it takes for evil to, like, succeed is good men to do nothing. Or good women in this case.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I hope that this actually changes something and you see DoubleLift and Leena. Now, DoubleLift already, I think, has said his piece. I'm not sure he has much more evidence that he could give than he would have. I think he probably would have given it already, given what's happened with the investigation. But if Leena has stuff like, people should be going, crazy releasing this information, and not just them, but a bunch of the other former TSM employees and anybody who can. Like, now is the time to do that. Let's finish this off. The vampire's in the coffin. You actually can stake it right now. It's asleep. We can actually kill TSM if people want to and people try.
I've got a closer for you, Monty.
Oh, yeah?
Right? I'm not actually sure which Justin Wong it is, unfortunately, because there are two famous Justin Wongs in esports. There's the Street Fighter player who does know these people, and then there's the one that worked for Twitch, if people don't know. It was like a high-up person at one point in time, right?
Yep.
I'm going to guess it was the Twitch one, in light of the fact it's Reggie and TSM. If you go to Reginald, Andy Din's LinkedIn page, this is an example of what the industry was like when people like DoubleLift and Leena wouldn't speak out. Remember, you go to LinkedIn, that's the main business thing. You see, who's this? Oh, that's very impressive. Oh, he's been the owner of TSM and WhatsApp. Remember when they didn't bother revealing that, and I had to reveal that, and then they apologized. Yeah, exactly. And Riot had secret ownership in it. Why did me and Rich Lewis have to do everything in a game we're not even from? I think it's shit kid's daughter. I don't want to have to be the fucking guardian of the game. So here's the quote, and when you hear this quote, you'll know what the industry was like when people like me were saying it and everyone didn't listen. So in recommendations received on Andy Din's LinkedIn page, it says, Justin Wong, I've had the pleasure of watching Andy build solo mid from a passionate group of like-minded gamers to one of the largest esports and influencer organizations in gaming today. In that time, Andy has grown into an inspirational leader, an industry figurehead. His domain expertise, business acumen, and keen insights are only surpassed by his genuine care for his players and employees, because esports is fucking inverted. The good people are the villains. The ones that are portrayed as the villains are the ones with the perfect track record, pure integrity. This is a shithole space, guys. And the question is this: do you want it to remain a shithole space, or will you contribute to it being better? Which is it going to be?
Yeah. Well said.
Right. Talk about some League of Legends and that, innit? Also, by the way, just as an aside, notice how, look, let's be real. In the chess move, and by the way, TSM and Leena did always know this. Is one thing I'll give her props for. She always did understand. If you have the platform she had when she was at TSM and DoubleLift has, it doesn't actually matter if me and Monty strike back. You got your result that you wanted, which is you turned everyone against the broadcast. You got the apology. You won out, and you reminded people Reggie's an arsehole. You actually won out there, even though on the plus minus, I will say, as a side effect, you did just get us to bring up Riot abuse, who you work with, and then also all the shit that you did and didn't do at TSM. So I would have said in theory, it doesn't really work out, but actually, as long as they don't care, it's the FaZe clan approach. As long as you get your crack off, who cares, basically? Obviously, Dom
all they have to do is convince some 15-year-olds to throw Twitch bits, subscriptions, and tweets, and then they win, I guess. You just have to convince dumb kids to do some actions, and then you get all the viewership. and your careers keep rolling. Well, tragic the way it works.
Oh, by the way, one last thing to throw in there. Wasn't it while Leena was TSM was president of TSM that Peter Zhang was supposedly ripping off all the
Yes.
One thing I hate about this is this. I said it before. Power and status come naturally with responsibility. The idea you're not responsible for these things, what the fuck are you responsible for? Someone explain it to me. Like, I don't get it, seriously. It's mental, isn't it?
Well, I
mean, like, here's the joke. People act, Monty, when she fails, doesn't matter. It was all going on during her time. She was one of the people promoting that fucker and saying he was good. Here's the story. Here's the angle for you, Monty. When something goes good in TSM, she's Bill Belichick. She runs the whole org. When something goes bad, she's Jason Garrett. Jerry Jones runs the whole thing. I'm just a fucking puppet. What am I doing here? It's not even my fault, is it? Give me a break. And by the way, spoiler, just in case I need to spell it out, you ain't Bill Belichick, homie. Even though he also does cheat as a piece of shit. So I get the confusion.
Too funny. So we actually didn't mention this. We are going to get PapaSmithy on today as a guest. So do you have any?
Oh, I didn't feel like coming on this segment. It's too early. Weird. Yeah, it's probably just too early for him. You know, Papa. He'd have jumped in. He's good mad. Right, whatever. Luckily, PapaSmithy wouldn't have anything to say about 100 Thieves anyway. He probably slams them. I saw your tweet, by the way, which was naughty. We'll definitely bring that up later. The one where you were like, if you're enjoying this FlyQuest roster, he could have just built it for 100 Thieves, couldn't he? Like, yes, now you say that.
It's okay. Yes. 100 Thieves is definitely not a hoodie org, Thorin. They're definitely not a hoodie org. They didn't just toss out the roster and the GM and the coaching staff that made back-to-back title or like championship matches and then won one title. So they made 3 finals in a row and won one of them. And they definitely didn't throw that all in the bin so that they could get DoubleLift and Bjergsen to sell hoodies. Definitely not.
Also, I will just throw this out there just because this isn't even about the case anymore, guys. That's ended. We're on to the humor section of the show where Thorin talks shit and it's sort of funny and he says something slightly naughty, but it's not that naughty. And we all laugh, and then we all get base. Right? I don't know why it sounded like Richard Lewis there, but I just did. Whatever. So here's the one thing I will say. Everyone knows that it already was awkward because DoubleLift actually, it's totally fine to do this. He doesn't like it. He had disrespected LeTigress previously. He said on his stream, when he used to be a streamer, she is le cringeness. Now, this is how I know if you're fucked in the head and you only think DoubleLift's a god and LeTigress is an idiot. Wouldn't that mean if she interviewed him before this incident, he'd be the one who'd be awkward because he'd said something kind of rude about her and then would have to do his job in front of her? No, because here's the thing. You know when DoubleLift goes, le cringeness. I'll tell you what's mad cringe, DoubleLift. Being the GOAT of a region, 6 times having the #1 seed, never getting out of groups at Worlds, and the last time you went there, getting 0-6'd the fuck out. And then you come back later, I want my millions of dollars. Where's all my money? You are cringe. You're fucking... The joke is, if I broke down your double helix chromosomes, homie, the cringe would be the word. I don't even know if all those letters exist in DNA.
Some of them do.
Well, whatever then. We'll make it work is the point. Yeah. He'd be the first ever one. Wow. He'd have the 3rd helix. He'd be like an advanced human, but it'd just be pure cringe, just going right through the center there. That's all he is.
There you go. It is wild. I think your tweet where you said that LeTigress is closer to being the best in the world at her role than DoubleLift was that's
a pretty good joke.
It's a pretty good.
Now, I will say, obviously, look, the scale amount of players trying to do lots. Less, obviously, it's a bit low hanging fruit, but it's a good line, isn't it? It's a good line.
It is a good line. I think that his criticism, given his own career, and he comes as the greatest North American player of all time, but he also never took any of the risks. He had many times in his career where he could have competed internationally.
Oh, for sure,
he could have played in Europe. He could have maybe played in China at times. He maybe, no joke, guys, he maybe could have played in Korea early in his career. By the way,
I'm not joking. I think when they did that tweet once before they got reckless and went Perks, I actually think for real, if you know Carlos, Ocelot actually would have been up to bring DoubleLift and put him in like Perks' spot. So I think that's, look, I don't think they ever actually did a thing on that, but I think for real, like that move could have happened. Or you could have been on the Fnatic for sure. Yeah, I'm with you. And we all know about the LCK one. I've no doubt he had LPL offers.
Oh, sure. So I think there were definitely points in his career where he could have taken a bigger risk and competed internationally, but he never did it. He never did these things. He was very comfortable just, and by the way, what we're talking about is the era in his career before he started winning titles. Like this was, we're talking like 2014, 2013, 2015. He did eventually win a title in 2015, right? But this was a time where he wasn't seeing a lot of success in NA. So ostensibly, there was no real reason for him to stick around when he could have potentially competed at a much higher level in a different region. And
what's great is I like the way no one left in the scene at this point actually defends Reggie anymore. Even TSM fans don't. There's just somewhere in California, one really lonely, like a Korean guy just going like, my heart will go on, Reginald. Loco, of course. Locodoco. The last man who ever defended him, probably still to this day, I'm sure. He'd find a way. Wild. He'd find a way, wouldn't he? I know.
And by the way, it's so Locodoco if you know him, because he just like thrives on abuse, man. He will make any excuse for his abusers. And you literally have conversations. I've had conversations with him where I think I'm going insane. I'm like, but Loco, this person is clearly, or this Riot is clearly abusing you. Yep. And he's like, but I just love it so much. I'm like, look, man, I can't solve whatever's going on in your brain right now. But I'm trying to help you. I am trying to help you.
No, Locos had the same problem LS did, which was when they would tell me like minor issues, but then they'd be like, but I'm not going to do anything about it, of course. I wouldn't want to make them upset. I'd be like, why you tell me then? I'm the guy you come to. And it's like, right, get the fucking horses and the shields and the men ready. Call the bannerman. We're going to war. It's like, no. Whoa. We're doing it. Well, why are you coming to me with that then? Just fucking keep to yourself.
He just wants to complain and then go back to being abused, which is also kind of how he existed on our shows. So you saw it. Indeed. Everybody knows that this is true.
But he was Lord for 1 year, I will say. He was once a Lord.
He was once a Lord. A fallen Lord.
Yes.
Into the canyon of Web3 and crypto. Okay, so I will say,
I even thought, I'm not joking. He is it wasn't TSM and all the funny thing. The first person I actually thought of when I saw all the markets crash, it was like, of course, this is when Loco pivoted his whole life into that field. And he's just the most unlucky guy of all time. And he can't, because if you don't know, guys, he did like poker, but didn't fully work. It sort of didn't. Then he did the esports. It was going pretty well, but it wasn't. Then he did content. He was the only guy ever to have 1 billion fucking views. I was doing all those shows. We couldn't get a single fucking sponsor. And then he's like, it's all right, guys. I'll go make a video game. I don't even know if he made the game or not. It was some like shit StarCraft game. And then lastly, he comes along. It's all right. I've decided to, hitch my sail to the master crypto. Everything's going up, Monty. I actually feel bad because obviously people lost loads of money, but come on, Loco. Come on, man. All I'm saying is this, Loco. If you're like, right, I'm going this way, I'm like, you know what? I'll wait till you get there. I'm heading the other direction. This is not a good look.
I am actually low-key, before we get PapaSmithy on, I'm actually very low-key excited about 100 Thieves' recent performance, Thorin, because I said I would be going all like Skip Bayless versus LeBron or Stephen A. Smith versus the Cowboys about DoubleLift, and I am so happy.
It's been good.
I am ecstatic they're 3-1 right now.
Yep.
Because he's beating Spawn and Tactical, and their schedule has been so weak. They've literally played Dignitas, TSM, and Immortals, and they got absolutely clapped by Cloud9. So I'm just gonna be loving this 100 Thieves versus FlyQuest game this next week. It's also great that Papa's here for this one, because I can't wait to see Prince versus DoubleLift, because that is going to be a beautiful thing, and you're gonna see exactly DoubleLift's current quality within that particular game. It's gonna be great, guys. It's gonna be great. So it is coming. It's good that we're riding this high right now, because the crash is going to be absolutely spectacular when it happens.
I'll also just say this as a random statement. It's not that dodgy, don't worry. One thing that I do feel really weird about, though, there's nothing wrong with it. It's totally fine to have this as his name. But you know the player who's his support, Busio, right? The reason I have a problem with that, Monty, is because think of other words around this time period that sound a bit similar. Well, in English like slang, a thing that people do say is pussyo. So all I'm saying is take that. I did two other things that I just feel a bit uncomfortable when I hear it, bussy or, just something that sounds a bit strange about it. That's all. It's all good. It's all good.
Apparently he's really enjoying playing with this guy. But yeah, I think
outstanding young man. Fair play.
I think we're setting up for the Titanic fall coming in for 100 Thieves. I'm definitely here for it. I do think 100 Thieves is going to be a playoff team. Like, don't get me wrong, they're solid in a way that, and especially with Dignitas being so garbage,
they're going to be top 4 at least.
Yeah, they should be absolutely fine. Yeah, I am excited though. I'm interested to hear Papa's very measured and sober take on his relationship with 100 Thieves on this show. maybe he'll give us some spice. Because there actually is a legitimate rivalry there, right?
Here's the thing.
After being in the org for years.
I'll ask you this. I'll say, do we just close and go to the Papa segment? Do I make a joke that slightly roasts him now before he comes on? Or do I do it old school SI and just do it when he comes on?
Oh, no, he's fine. You can do it.
Yeah, well, in that case, I'll hold on that one. But I'm going to start the next segment with some fire in the chamber, put it that way.
All right, let's take a break. Let's get Papa on, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Right, we're back. Our guest for this segment is going to be PapaSmithy, who is obviously one of the head figures over at FlyQuest now. Previously, before that, he was obviously one of the top commentators at the beginning in the LPL. It was more of an amateur broadcast. Then he worked at LCK for many years. He did World Finals, all the big tournaments. Then he came over to NA. He obviously did the 100 Thieves project, got him to those 3 finals. There was also the period before with the whole, reopen thing, but we don't talk about that anymore. That was the key thing. Is there's a saying in sports, you have to learn how to lose to learn how to win.
Hey, he was waiting for a green card.
Taylor's oldest time in America.
There's truth in all those things. I think the truth is that with the information I had at the time and the budget we had at the time, I'd go back and do the same thing. Like, I think we got a really low roll of what could have happened there. Like, I think Tommy didn't play well in LCS. Like, that's obviously a fair cop to him, but moving with COVID just starting and all the realities there and just the mess that went on, yeah, it didn't do what we wanted, but 3rd in regular season in that spring season. And yeah, there's a happy ending to it, but I don't cope too much about that time. Like, I take my L's with my dubs. You got to do that,
And then obviously at 100 Thieves, you had the championship with Abidag and you had 2 other finals. By the way, a couple of those, those are some nicks. You stole a few from teams that may be better, but that doesn't matter. You got to the finals. But all I'll say is this. At the end, I heard you sort of got a bit done over, a bit harshly, a bit sort of betrayed by 100 Thieves. Maybe they didn't deliver on stuff. All I'll say is this on Papa, no honor among thieves. Do you know that? There's no honor among thieves. You up for that one.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I talked a bit about it publicly. It's not something I want to like dredge up too much, but
no, it's not an LCS segment or anything. So yeah,
fair. But ultimately, like, the ending was influenced by kind of budget scenarios, and like even this roster that 100 Thieves has is like a pretty incredible list of talent for kind of like the situation going on there. And obviously they had layoffs again recently, so I think ultimately there's obviously some misgivings and hard feelings, right, with how things went, but ultimately I'm excited to play them on Friday, right? I wanted to say Sunday, but that's not how things work, but I'm excited to play them on Friday.
I do want to ask at the outset one question. I'll make it open-ended. You can answer however you want, mate. Which is, when Monty made that tweet, which was a good Twitter dunk, is it actually accurate, or was he just making like a funny connection? Like, if you'd have been at 100 Thieves, could you have made the same lineup you have now in FlyQuest for 100 Thieves?
What does the word "could" mean in that sentence? Like, it could mean a lot of things.
Would you have afforded it? Would the players have joined?
No, we didn't have the budget for it.
Okay. It was just a good tweet then. Fair enough.
Yeah. Ultimately, it's like, obviously the level of talent we brought to FlyQuest this year is unique. Like, the level of player that we're able to attract, Prince, a top 5 AD in the world, top 2 inarguably in summer, regular season at least, in LCK, and Vikla, like a rising mid laner. Like, I had multiple off seasons. I knew how hard it was to draw even aspiring Korean mid laners, let alone top prospects. So I think Nick did a wonderful, wonderful job. I don't inflate my impact on this offseason at all. But
oh,
together,
by the way, guys, to provide context, Nick is Nick Fan, who's Swagasaurus,
correct.
who's the GM of FlyQuest. Just so you guys are aware, he's been the GM for a long time. He's the guy who did a lot with a little money in terms of getting, budget rosters into finals and stuff like that. So he's actually been one of the better GMs. Did you rate him?
Even signed Flame, so we know he's got brilliant taste.
Sure.
So
you'd be happy with that.
Did you rate him, because obviously you were GM to GM, like battling, right? How did you rate him while you were at 100 Thieves?
He was someone who in the space was always competent and was always looking to try and find an advantage, even with little resources. And I think for those people, you just wait for the moment where the scenario changes. Like, I think it's awesome that he has had an off season where he was actually supported financially in a way that could never happen under previous ownership here at FlyQuest. And I think he ran with it. And the initial list of names that we were looking at was a sort of list I look at and I'm like, okay, from my experience, this is not the sort of like talent we can draw to a new project or a project that's kind of renewing their identity. And he did it all in one off season. So hats off to him. And we're kind of sipping champagne at the success right now.
So what was
by the way, I'll also give him one piece of credit as well that I think is underrated. Apparently he is a smart man because he knew to sign Impact. Every other one just lets him go. I'm going to do a whole video on that one day. I'll never understand why all these orgs let that player go, man. I think he's just like the centerpiece of like all the LCS championships is ridiculous.
Well, I think I heard Impact wanted to leave EG.
There's spoiler, Monty. Spoiler. I don't know if you've been following my content recently. Everyone wanted to leave EG. Everyone.
Yeah.
So that might be an extended.
He's not a very popular org among people within the industry.
Check out my YouTube channel if you want to see some amazing stuff.
But yeah, but what was the process of this offseason? Because usually there's certain dominoes that have to fall, and it feels like now is a good time where we're kind of removed enough from it that you could reveal it. Like, which were the first pieces signed? What convinced? Because you said that it had been hard in the past getting these top Korean players / prospects. So how did you convince Vikla and Prince to come over? Which players were signed first, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, we did a video on this it's on our YouTube channel, but I'll summarize. Basically, the first piece signed was Ayla. Ayla moving up from Team Liquid Academy, probably the best performing support and maybe best performing player over the course of Academy last year, and kind of sorely overdue for a spot. That was like the first player that we'd agreed on. And from there, it was looking at what the options were. Vikla was a target, like a top target for the team for sure. And looking at his availability, and it was a buyout scenario with KT, was something that was simmering. But I think for us, the big thing was, and kind of when I joined, was kind of already the tail end of the LEC offseason. Like, if you guys remember, the LEC offseason went super fast. And so looking into European talent wasn't really going to be possible. And so the questions were, do we go for available talent, or do we kind of hold our nerve and test the Korean market? Because you get very, very limited information about what players are going to be open to international offers, since Korean teams don't allow their players traditionally, in most cases, to speak before the contract date, whether it's like the 22nd of November. I forget the exact date that it was this year. So given that, it was just kind of like understanding what our risk tolerance was, and we thought the best possible high roll would be to kind of sample what was available with Korean teams. We were able to speak to KT early, which was a big advantage to us, and kind of understand if there was going to be a deal involving Vikla. And at that time, there were eligible NA free agents, obviously Impact and Speaker Chief among them. And it was kind of, and Bjergsen was there obviously as well, DoubleLift as well, coming out of retirement and was speaking to teams. So there were these combinations and understanding, okay, what roles do we have as residents? Who are the import players? And even with the visible import players of like, these players are, potentially coming into free agency, we're not obviously sure which of them are going to be interested in our project. So it's there was a lot of balls in the air, and kind of where it landed was, to me, the best possible case of what was possible here at FlyQuest. And the last piece that was kind of the one that informed the roster was Prince finally communicating that yes, like FlyQuest was a roster when he heard the names, Vikla in particular, but Impact as well. That gave him confidence to commit. and that just put everything into place because there was other combinations with imports at different roles that had to be considered, right? Like at the end of the day, I think that Nick got the high roll. I think Nick got the like S plus roster that if people don't know, in the offseason, a GM kind of has to have like 10, 20 permutations of if this player is available, if the resident's available in this role, then we have to compensate in that role when it comes to imports. Like, I think we got the biggest possible high roll as it all came together. And a lot of it was fortuitous, a lot of it was timing, and a lot of it was, oh, you got that guy, I'm now interested. And so the butterfly effect led to these 5, and I couldn't be happier.
It's also really interesting because you haven't even had the full roster yet because Ayla hasn't been there. And you've had Winsome, who's been performing really well. So it feels like you even have redundancy within this roster because if anything, Ayla would be the most unknown player. And Winsome is coming in and performing already with Prince at a high level, and he speaks Korean. So you in a way have a safeguard, even if Ayla performs poorly for whatever reason, you have a tested quantity now in Winsome that you know is clearly capable of. I mean, it appears capable of winning the LCS. You completely dumpstered Cloud9 this last week, and they were your biggest rival, it would appear, in the early days. Like, FlyQuest is a team that seems head and shoulders at the moment above the rest of this league.
I think on stage that has been the reality. I think the quality on stage is a big elevation over what we do in scrims. I think some people think light of us because there's a lot we need to test. There's a lot that needs to be stress tests. There's a lot of language stuff that we're kind of learning scrim on scrim. So I think the step up from scrim to stage, you don't know that before you actually play your first stage games, and we're obviously only 4 games into stage, but seeing the stage performance of players like Impact and Prince compared to kind of just trying to make sense of scrims, and everybody knows that scrims are solving for many different things. It's not about who wins, it's about whether you're progressing on the goals that you set for that week. And then also the stage drafts. I think Song is someone who's sorely undercredited for a strong start. It makes sense. We have 5 new players on the roster, so a lot of shiny different things to be excited about. But I think drafting wise, especially the C9 draft, there was a lot that was set up there that is being slammed down by the strong players we have. So a lot of credit to diffuse among the players and stuff.
I mean, to me, the wildest part is not that you got Prince, because you guys had money to throw around, right? And there was a possibility that you would be able to get players like Prince or Vikla when you're paying better than any of the LCS teams, right? But the real
he wasn't on a top team in terms of the orgs, so I doubt he was getting like insane money in Korea, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he had good offers in other regions in China and stuff, to be sure, but it depends on what you know, if you want to live in China or not, is a big one, and what your goals are. But, and especially, I mean, I think we can think of at the end of last year when these players were signing, when all of the COVID lockdowns were still happening, maybe China was not an attractive destination for a lot of these professional players. Obviously, that's changed pretty significantly right now, but you have to take quality of living into effect, right? But to me, the craziest part is you guys got the world champion coach at the end, seemingly arbitrarily. Like, how did that particular part come together? Because the fact that this guy was available is just so fucking wild to me.
And I think that was wild to us too. Ultimately, changing coaching staff wasn't a priority coming into the off season, especially when there was no guarantee that we'd be going down like a majority Korean speaking roster. As that became apparent, it's like, okay, we need to get a Korean voice on the team, ideally someone who's bilingual and who can carry some of the cultural elements of, especially these Korean players who've never played in the West before. And we were very happy with our coaching staff. We had Sharks as head coach, Richard as assistant coach. And we're looking to supplement that, but definitely not in a way to bring in a new head coach. And then it came to the point where the roster was complete. We were shopping around, and what you would have noticed is a lot of LCK teams picked up ex-pro players in kind of elevated titles and in greater quantities than ever before. If you remember last year when Score was announced as the new Gen G coach, that was something that was actually caused a minor uproar in the scene, just because Korean fans were like, "Oh, he's never head coached
and
a
he's
team
been
before.
in the military.
He's
for
never
2
even
years.
been a coach. He's been in the military recently. He's been playing solo queue and aspiring towards seeing if he can be a player again. And you're bringing him as direct entry head coach. That's crazy, because this is not how things are done in Korea traditionally. You do your apprenticeship as a second or third tier coach, and then work your way up to a higher spot. But this year, a lot more pro players are being elevated into head coaching spots. I assume inspired by how well Score did and Genji did with him a year earlier. And so the sort of coaches that would have made sense as an assistant coach were being snapped up or not available to us. And the coach that fell to us and didn't seem to have too many other compelling options just because of how late in the off season it was Song, which is surreal, right? There's no other way to put it. And to see his impact
Especially
already,
because he's been in LCS before for many years. So I imagine his English is probably pretty decent at this point in time. And he's used to working in the LCS and living in Los Angeles. So there's very few unknowns. And it's also crazy because DRX was a team that had to be well coached to win. Like they had to be more than the sum of their individual parts. They had to be creative in these drafts at Worlds. They had to be surprising. They had to be innovative. They had to have their emotions in check on some of these matches where they're incredibly tilting circumstances on DRX's run where like, how do you, I mean, Deft coming back after that, like inhib incident or the Nexus incident at Worlds was really crazy that they were able to bounce back in that series. And all of that to me points to the fact that this guy was extremely integral. And for him to just completely wash out of the LCK after doing all of these things that he did is surreal.
I think there's always a player or a coach that plummets out of kind of the top team stratosphere each offseason, and for some reason it was Song this time. And I don't know how much of that was DRX kind of like mulling over whether they were sticking together or departing and all the players going in different directions. Like I can't speak to that, but ultimately we get a guy straight off his career peak achievement of World Championship who has a bone to pick, because obviously Song's tenure in the LCS was front loaded when it comes to positivity. The IMT roster 6 years ago now, under Nick Fan, amusingly, and the struggles afterwards at the subsequent, I believe, 3 teams are still fresh in the mind. The fact that he hasn't picked up a domestic title win as a head coach, people might not remember, but he was assistant coach for the Rocks Tigers when they won LCK in summer 2016. Last time we casted together, actually, with the Doa Monte. Is it still something that he's serious about? He wants to come back to the LCS and show that it's not a paycheck for him, that it is time for him to start stacking up his CV. And I've been very, very impressed with his acumen so far.
I think the angle that's also missed is
hold up. On his resume, he wants to come back to the LCS to win a title after he wins a world championship. That's so fucking absurd.
I think it's because people look, the grass is always greener, and people always, in my experience in competitive, and I'm a bit like this too, is like you want to be able to shut up the haters and the doubters and the things you have imposter syndrome about. And a world champion can still have imposter syndrome. My favorite ever content Riot made was the duos video with Crown and Core, right? When I think it's 2019, where they talk about Crown talks about winning worlds and then still not feeling that like career high or that justification that would make it all worth it. And I don't want to speak for Song in that case, but I know that he looks at that gap and thinks a lot about it, just like Ruler clearly did about winning the LCK after winning worlds so many years ago. So I'm the person that benefits directly from that, so I'll take it, right?
It's too funny.
Also, the other thing to me is this. He's not coming back like he did into those teams. Those teams would have like one Korean. TSM was no Koreans. It was all Western players. The actual angle that no one has ever tried, ever, is a majority Korean team with a Korean coach. People did it all separately. They went, right, Korean players must be the best, right? Get Pigler, get all these guys in. Oh, I mean, they can be pretty good, but they can also be worse than LCS. Oh, what's going wrong? Get all the coaches in, get Kane in, get the Song in, get all these. Oh, they're just not as good when they're here, though. No one's tried, with the exception now, actually, of Team Liquid with Marin, actually having a majority team and the Korean coach, because logically the culture fit can potentially travel. He can take the majority Korean players and they are going to be on the same page. It's not the same as like the first battle of the Western culture with the Korean player is, right, how do I find the middle ground? How do I understand who this guy is? How do I actually learn how much can I ask from him? What am I? So I think that's the angle that I'm really excited for, because it's the first time we've actually had sort of like the whole approach, because that's been done in LPL a lot of times if people don't know, and it's worked a lot of times as well. That's been one of their secrets as well. So I think that's like a very cool angle to look for on the LCS, even though, as we said at the beginning, the actual song move sort of went under the radar compared to the names like Prince, etc.
Yeah, I think that's a fair take. I mean, for us, we're not looking to transition to become a full Korean-speaking roster, like TL is. But obviously, there's like very big personalities and star players who are Korean speakers first and foremost. I think, to me, the thing that's the most surprising is like Prince next to Someday is like the player who's come to NA at the peak of his powers, Court as well to some degree. When he joined TL in 2019. And so to get a player like that here and to get a super mechanically talented rookie mid laner and a coach whose biggest compliment you could pay to him is that he was a clutch drafter. I think that DRX's draft adjustments and how they played on a settled patch were the praises were sung and deservedly so for what he was able to do there. So I know that the angle there is important. And to some degree, having Sharks as our head of coaching to kind of ensure that the cultural side and the cultural bridge between the players that naturally exists when you have a multicultural roster is there, alongside just an astute drafter in Song is, just smart staff construction. I will say that, again, we just do kind of have overwhelming player power. Like, we just really do have talented players. So I still think there's going to be some volatility in our regular season results, and I think that's all fine. But in terms of once it's all completely in sync, like this is still beta testing for us, but once it's all completely in sync, our players are fucking good. And I think that's the part that hypes me the most.
Let's go one step further then, because the other thing I have to say about LCS that did sap my interest to watch the league each year, someone who has no actual, beyond this show, financial reason to watch the league. I actually have none at all. I can do all my content about LEC now. The joke is that get the same hits. The main thing that used to make me upset was I would see all the rosters and I would be like, even if that ends up actually being the best NA team, like they can't do anything in the playoffs at Worlds. They can't do anything at MSI. They're not going to beat RNG or T1. This is one of the rare times where at the beginning, I actually do look at the lineup and I'm like, if everything goes well and things all come together, the piece, you got the coach, you got the stars, even like this is the other one that kills me. Normally, there is always going to be one lane will get crushed internationally. If Impact ends up being the weaker lane and the other, he's made his whole career doing that. He's constantly been able to compete. I actually think, look, you can't say too much now because you'll look silly, obviously, if it goes to the pot. But I think this is one where I'm projecting forwards. Like when I think of the MSI tournament with those 2 NA spots and the double elim format, a lot of play to have there. I think of Worlds. Like I think this is another team where you can potentially, if things go well, be hyped for like actual international parity.
That you have to construct rosters to do well in your region, but the qualities that do that will do well internationally. And I know that that's something that's been debated in the past, and there's players who haven't been able to live up to that potential, but I do feel like we have players who are not going to be humbled on the world stage in our construction. I think that has to make you wonder, has to make you excited, has to make you cast forward to those 2 spots to go to MSI with a strong format and potential double elimination and see what it's all about. And yeah, there's currently right now there's no red flags to suggest that we're going to have any issues boot camping or getting better if we get to an event like that. I just don't want to, trip over my shoelaces and cast forward too much because we're still in an extension of the honeymoon phase. It's still very relatively early in the dynamic of the group and in the dynamic of the regular season. This is not the LEC. We're not 2/3 of the way through the round robin phase, or I guess single round robin in LEC. So there's going to be challenges around the corner. And I'm excited to see how these guys will face up to them, because if we get to those opportunities, when we get to the best of 5s, that's when we're going to see the true quality and character of this team.
The problem is there's some people out there, some GMs, they're already planning to activate at Worlds before they've even done anything domestically.
Look,
they know who they are.
You're raking over the coals someone who had to justify their financial spend with activations, right? Like that's what Steve had to do. Like, it's rough.
Yeah.
I mean, I am.
I mean, listen, Papa, I will just say, mate, I won't shed a single tear for him wasting other people's money. If it was his money, you know what? I'd go fair play. You put it that was someone else's money, homie. So yeah, he should actually have. Guess what? I think that's what should happen. I know people like Leena might not know this. When you have millions of dollars of other people's money, you should probably be responsible with it.
I don't know, because like the whole thing about that TL roster last year was the reason they were able to construct it and have a $6.9 million budget was because they sold it to their sponsors and their sponsors liked it. So
was it really 6.9?
Yes.
Well, in the end, everyone got fucked in the head.
So, I mean, the reason they were able to get that budget together was because they could go to their sponsors and say, hey, do you guys want to pay more money in order for us to get this roster? And they said yes. So it was sponsor money. It wasn't even VC money. I don't think. I think the reason why they were able to get that was because the sponsors themselves were excited by it. So in that case, I think we can joke about it, but why not take the swing for the home run? Because we said the same thing we're saying about FlyQuest now last year, which is like this team on paper of Team Liquid should have been able to do some very real damage internationally with the roster that they had. It didn't end up that way, and it started rocky. I mean, we can look at using the eye test, we can say FlyQuest looks a fuckload better right now than Team Liquid did when they were at the similar point last year. So it probably won't end up the same way. And also the talent on this roster is pretty crazy from a mid and AD position for FlyQuest. I think there's an argument to be made that Prince is the best import ever in LCS. When it comes
in light of the fact he's only played 4BO once, but yeah, okay.
Right.
In the context,
we'll get there. Yeah. It's going well so far. Obviously, we're not gonna give Prince.
The only thing is, though, I will say the joke there, Papa, is Monty meant that as a totally genuine piece of analysis, but himself inadvertently donked on Team Liquid harder than I did. Think about it. How did their off-season go? If it's not the World Championship,
I'm just providing context. You can
yeah, no, you're right. It's all good. It's all good.
But I'm saying, and when I put it
it's
this
him
way,
or Core JJ. Let's be real.
It's when I say Prince is the best import ever, I mean not that there have been other imports. Like Bjergsen was obviously very good, but Bjergsen didn't come in on the high. Like this is the most like in terms of level,
his career's player
coming in,
right?
Like coming in at a very high point. It does feel like a steal.
I don't want to like undersell my boy. Like Prince is a stud. I will say that I think Someday was inarguably a top 5 mid laner in the world when he joined Dignitas. And I think that Prince was an arguable top 5 AD in the world when he joined FlyQuest. So I think that to me, Someday was like solid gold example. I think that especially form wise at the end of regular season, I think it would be very, very close on the Prince side. But I think what I will say is that Prince's ability to integrate already and speak strong English and kind of be a emotional center for the team alongside his play, like there's less cultural barriers with him than there was with Someday, who you remember Someday when you were casting in Korea, he was very introverted. He was known for like tweeting out after matches, looking for support for the fans. Like he very much rode the energy of the fans when he was on KT. Like that was a crazy move for him. Like he was so close to being the best top laner in the world, and he like went against his culture with no English to North America. I think Prince was someone who was always going to be a slam dunk in the West. I know you believed in a K-Draw, Wolf. Like everybody knew that if he was to come to NA and want to make it work, like he's the exact correct personality. So I think he's been unlocked early, and he's been able to show his level earlier than Someday, who kind of had that more rough adjustment period. And then my only other point is like Core is the other name people will bring up. I actually think Core had a really poor 2018 by his standards before he came over, but he instantly was like way better than his 2018 form in an inferior league in 2019, which is like its own kind of wonderment that he was able to do that. So those are the 3 names, and I don't think when it comes to, like you say, entry level into the league, you could go past those 3 names for the LCS.
Yeah. Good point. I mean, this is why it's good to have a conversation with you, knowing the history of all of the imports and having worked with, a couple of them.
2 out of 3.
Yeah, 2 out of 3. But Prince reminds me a lot more of Reaperd, where if you just know Reaperd's personality, Reaperd's very well set up for Western culture, because Reaperd is.
Amazing he's not coaching now, though, dude. I think that's mental. Why is he not in the LCS now?
He is coaching. He's the coach and CGO of Sengoku Gaming.
Yeah, he's in LJL now.
I don't give a shit about
that. I think Reaper, Reaper is a person though who I was very confident was going to succeed in terms of coming over and coaching in the West because of his personality and because he is like very blunt. I mean, he's a blunt person by any standard, but he's like eerily blunt by Korean standards, right? And I love that about Reaper. Like I adore Reaper's personality. But Prince,
Mate, it looked like in the playoff game 5s, he was hitting the blunt before those drafts. Fucking hell. Whatever. It's just an old
before my time. Before my time.
It's an old thing. Don't worry about it. It's all good.
But when we talk about Prince, and I messaged Papa, and I was like, oh man, this guy's gonna do great in North America because he was already kind of talking shit in Korea. And I know you can really unleash this guy in the West. Like you can feel that he wants to do this and that he is a very outgoing person. And he has a flair of showmanship and a fire and drive that's like, it's charismatic. And so it's not only
right. He's very gregarious, like he's very sociable, like he'll go around to our business stuff and say hello and kind of like accost them or have fun with them, even though English is still a developmental thing for him. And he's super down to shine a spotlight on himself and make himself like the most accountable person to a win, or like, set himself up for a fall, knowing that he's skilled enough and confident enough to take that on. Like he's kind of a one of a kind in that way. So I definitely see the similar qualities to how Reaper is as a person with Prince, and it's exceedingly rare for especially a Korean who's usually going to be a lot more self-conscious about those things. I think Prince is just always going to launch himself in 100%, and at worst he slips on a banana peel and picks himself up, and at best he's just a star.
So when we've seen players come over in the past, there has been like kind of a slow degradation of individual ability by coming to North America and having kind of a lackluster practice environment. Now it's too early to see that yet, because obviously these players are still riding the high of like a very intense practice environment in Korea. You guys did a Korean boot camp prior to the LCS. What are your ideas for how to stop the slide of being in North America throughout the year for players that are at the level that Prince and Vikla are currently playing at?
There's certain parts of it that just you have to deal with the realities of the situation. The reality is obviously the scrim opponents we have, we don't have the ability to pivot to other complementary regions that are similar levels of skill, like you can in Korea with LPL and other regions that are around. So I think there is going to be the need to set up a strong internal culture of accountability and taking scrims seriously. I think that's still a point that we have some work to do. And then having again this cultural mix of people between the West and the East, and fully getting through that and setting ourselves up for a bootcamp mentality. Like the thing that takes FlyQuest over the hump, if we do qualify for an MSI, to actually performing at a tournament like MSI or Worlds, is the ability to hit a Korean bootcamp or a pre-MSI bootcamp of 2 weeks and understand the world meta and level ourselves up with better competition fast. And I think some teams have gone internationally and done that very, very well. Traditionally, Cloud9 obviously has been kind of the biggest benefactors of doing something like play-ins or getting the most out of a boot camp. And then, TSM 2020 at Worlds would probably be like the worst example of really atrophying when under that different level of pressure. And that's not a pressure we can simulate in North America. It's just not the reality of the scenario here. So even again, we're skipping steps and assuming that everything comes together, but setting up a culture of accountability and everybody on the team being able to understand their role that can kind of be flexible to higher and lower levels of competition is a work in progress that we're already thinking about.
By the way, that's why I'm also so hyped for MSI, because if you think about the way MSI goes, as long as people can just avoid the smaller regions and you can just get into the playoffs, the double elim factor means no matter what your result there is, the same lineup can go to Worlds. You could have like 2 best of 5s against Asian teams. You could have a best of 5 against Europe. You could have so much experience that was impossible to get before. Because remember, the old format meant it was always like China, Korea, except that one time CLG got Flash Wolves, helped them out, and they got that finals. It meant you only ever got the 1BO5, and that was just the champion of the region. So the difference now for the NA teams could be huge, I think, when we come to Worlds.
I mean, MSI was just a bit of a Mickey Mouse tournament. Like, nobody was hyped about it. You know, GMs and people.
It's basically just Korea versus China. Who's better, right?
I mean, yes, effectively. But what I mean is like people when they qualified weren't hyped to go. You know, like that's like they're like, oh, now I don't have a break and there's this tournament and like, what will I really take from it? It's going to be like multiple patches removed from summer and the break after the tournament to summer. Even if you crater out in groups or quarterfinals is very short. There just wasn't a lot going for it. And I think when you get there, also, there's going to be limited scrim opponents usually, unless you're in Korea and the teams are still practicing in the off season. So there's just like, there was so many asterisks that everyone wasn't super hyped about. And now the format is so much more robust. And I imagine there'll be ERL and other teams over in London, or in Europe to compete against. Like, this should be a very vibrant, very exciting tournament to be a part of. So suddenly, doubling the seeds doesn't seem like it's going to change much. But with that, and also the format being reinforced, I think teams are now looking at it and aspiring to go.
I mean, I've already said, but I think it will be considered the best tournament of the year.
Yeah, I think given the format, it's going to be probably the most exciting, and it's nice that we're actually going to see some meaningful competition, not only between more Asian teams, but we get to see probably a lot more competition between North America and Europe, which is just exciting for everybody to watch. I also think, part of the reason when we go back to leveling teams up for Worlds, I think part of the reason NA fared so poorly at Worlds this year was because the tournament was in NA and there wasn't time this year for teams to go to Asia to boot camp. So what ends up happening is all of the Asian teams just sit around in Asia, LPL and LCK teams all scrim each other, right? And then they come to NA a week before, and then the NA teams have just been sitting around NA, the EU teams have just been sitting around Europe, and the Western teams just get absolutely dunked on. It is so much better for foreign teams when Worlds is in Asia, because you can go there in advance to practice and actually catch up a little bit prior to the tournament starting.
One of the perversion is a strong word to use, but it's like one of the things that's so clear 13 years into this, circuit, is that the more that you are globally restricted from competing against the best teams, the faster you have to catch up. So if you lose that 2-week boot camp, in Korea or against the teams that are in the tournament, and it becomes, I think we had like 5 days of low ping games. Like, we tried to scrim from LA to Mexico with the play-in teams, and that there were like connection issues. One day it was like 70 ping, the next day it was 200, so we couldn't play. Smithy talked about this extensively in the past a lot, and it's something that I think fans roll their eyes at, which is fair enough to some degree. The truth is like, I look at the LEC format, right? And 2 teams crater out, and it's, if they were believing in their guys, they do have 3 weeks to send them over to Korea right now to train up before spring season starts. And those sort of opportunities where, with money, which obviously North America has always had and used for different means, you can go out and do a Korea boot camp or do a boot camp in general and get a different practice environment and get ahead. With the way the schedule was, that's not even possible. Like, money doesn't impact that. It's just about scheduling and time and things like that. So finding ways to get access to the best competition is something you always want. So I think it's a fair shake to say that being removed kind of softened the advantage of having this theoretical home field advantage in North America, where
I don't think the home
scrims
field advantage is relevant.
Yeah,
I don't think it's relevant because typically I just don't see. First off, all the fans were LPL fans in North America, as we learned at some of these venues, right? So there wasn't. It really was an LPL home field advantage in many ways, not for NA teams. And the NA teams were all, eliminated so quickly that those fans were, not relevant to the bracket results, right? But yeah, I'm also, from like regarding practice and continuing down this line, there's been a lot of talk recently, and I've been watching some of Artemis, one of the old EG coaches, his ideas about the scrim schedule. And as somebody who has set up the scrim schedule, you guys went from the one 5-game scrim block a day to now these 2-3-game scrim blocks. Is this something that you were on board with? Do you think this has actually helped the practice environment, or is it hurting? Is it not making a difference? What's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that has been a refrain for a couple of years because people are always looking for just a more convenient reason for kind of regional lack of competition. And I think that it was
to me because the answer is just there aren't as many teams to practice against, and the solo queue is there aren't as many people playing the game, so it's harder to get good practice. Why do we have to find all of these other reasons?
Because that's so empty and defeatist, right? When you're in North America, yeah, they're unfixable. So like you're right, but like, are you gonna have self-respect or the ability to speak out if you just the solution is to like sit there and try to just re-examine how you kind of like one hand clapping solve the scrim problem and things like you need something, right? Like everyone needs an outlet, and the current outlet is scrim schedule. Because look, there are trade-offs with doing 5 games in a row versus doing 2 blocks. Like when you go to Korea and scrim in Korea, as we were a month ago, I guess 2 months ago, the 2-block system feels great because you play 3 games. It's, I don't know, 4:30 p.m. and then you're in Seoul. So your options are, do I want to go out to some walkable, delicious food? Korean solo queue is going to have a lower queue time by a lot compared to North American solo queue. Solo queue is vibrant there till 4 a.m. So a lot of the Korean pros, you guys will, if you do time kind of like conversion, especially when T1 was streaming very publicly on Twitch, like they're playing till 3 a.m., 4 a.m. I forget what the cutoff time is, one of those two. And so they'll play first block, out of bed kind of scenario, and then nap for a couple of hours. Like there's a lot of compelling uses of like a 2.5 hour break. I think in North America, when it's 3:30, 4 p.m., your options of how to valuably use that time are more limited, and people will suggest things who are outside of teams, and there's like always partial validity to them, like, oh, you could use your academy team for this and that, but those schedules aren't even complementary. Like academy is playing when LCS, like stage games when LCS is either on break or first day back and things like that. It's not like their schedules are aligned. Actually, one of the things I asked Riot a few years ago was to sack academy viewership so that academy could be like on a similar time scale and actually be available as a training partner, and not even every org set up their academy team to solve that goal. So the reality is that scrim schedule changing, if you could control for all the other variables, could be great, but I personally wasn't like a fan of it when TSM was proposing it 2 years ago now, or for the 2022 season. I know that that's been talked about publicly recently. Kays was tweeting about it. And when a couple of people approached me at the start of this offseason, obviously I'm no longer a GM, and like my opinion is a lot more just accumulation of time rather than like trying to step up and have a voice. I was like, sure, it's fine to try, and if it works, it works, but it's not set up to succeed in North America like it is in Korea. So I had healthy skepticism that kind of having this longer day was actually going to solve for the things that it says it's going to solve for.
I've got a couple of things I want to chuck out there. So I'll be the person you just spoke about who's an outsider who just throws something out there. Maybe it doesn't work or it's just not feasible, but you just have an idea because I don't have to live it through. Do I have to make it happen? It's not logistics I have to worry about. There's 2 obvious things I would do. One, I've always thought this was one of the silliest things because it's the Riot circuit that keeps teams apart. If you watch CS:GO, mate, every region can, in theory, rise if they can just attend the tournament. It's actually about just have the money to travel, and do you have a qualifier? They often do, by the way. So then it becomes things like you do the same thing. You hire a coach for your Chinese team from the European team, the European meta. You get in a few tournaments. If you get 3 in a row that are in the summer in Europe, you go a month early, you boot camp with all the other teams, you play a few online cops, you get your reps in. It's like doing the Ultimate Worlds boot camp, and you're able to level up. So 2 things I would do is, one, if I was Riot, look, they obviously have a very different perspective than me. But years ago, it was obvious to me that if you remember, there didn't even used to be an MSI. You used to just go to Korea. It used to be back in the day just a 2-week boot camp. And that included the first week of getting all your sleep together. You just go for a 2-week boot camp, straight into Worlds. Back then, by the way, if T1 and Rocks beat your ass in the first day of practice, you don't even get to play them anymore. Now you're playing 5th best LCK team, teams from VCS. You know, your practice isn't even the dream practice you want. We didn't have Korean coaches as often back then. You didn't have you didn't have the connection of like, hey, come on guys, give me a scrim block here, throw me a bone. So one, if I was Riot, if I actually cared specifically about LCS and LEC being better, I would have designed the yearly calendar to just have some more open sections where you could do regular boot camps. Every 2 months you could go for a week. Every 3 months you could go for a week. Well, I'd do that because that's an obvious way to sort of like give you you can sort of maintain and you see where the meta's at. You can test yourself. You can go back home and go. And then the other one is this, and I'll let you can see what you like about them. The other one is this. When I hear all these stories and I watch the documentaries, those reality series people do about their teams, people are still doing the VOD review with the whole team in the room of the game we just played, and it's us or it's our next opponent. This is like the way they would coach baseball like 100 years ago. Here's what I would do in the modern day, because there's a story in CSGO where the first Brazilian team to become world champions were in an inferior region, NA. They would essentially practice differently. They got to go to Europe all the time anyway, so the region wasn't a problem. And they would spend before majors, twice as much time on theory as playing the game, because they knew I'm playing worse teams. Now, here's what I would do in the modern day. Half my theory would be just taking the best LPL and LCK VODs and breaking that down with the players. And then lastly, I wouldn't do it as a team. I would break down things out. The joke is last year, I'd have been showing like my ADC, I'd have been showing Berserker all the Prince VODs and all the ones of Ruler and all these, and I'd have been working with him in the same way as if you're in the NFL. You don't waste the time of the defense listening to what the wide receiver's doing on his route or the running back. So what do you think of these aspects? Obviously, I'm just throwing them out there.
So for the first one, I think the most important thing to spell out is that you're solving for Riot, or you're ascribing Riot to solve for North America and European team international competitiveness at international events.
Yes.
That's not what Riot should solve for in their eyes. That's not what they're motivated to do. Just like when people like scrap spring season, it doesn't matter, and run an open circuit and then do a summer season if you have to have a league. Like, okay, but spring season has higher viewership than summer season because people have less competition for their time when it comes to spring versus summer, because they're not on holidays, they're at university. So like, guess what? They're motivated to get the highest average viewership or minutes viewed or whatever the latest statistic is. That's going to happen in spring. That's going to be the thing that they sell to sponsors. That's going to make this scene viable or profitable, or whatever the word is, from Riot's POV. So they're not solving for that. So they're not doing that. Obviously, we could go back to season 2 and have everybody boot camping for MLG, and all the stories about how Gambit Gaming were always able to peak at the right time because they understood how to have like work-life balance and be like super off-season mode, then super boot camp mode before they went to an IEM and things like that. Like that is not the ecosystem we exist in. So that's not supported. Just like that's just a reality of where we're at. So a lot would have to deconstruct for that to change. That's why I'm kind of interested to see what XL and Fnatic do in terms of, do they go and do an international boot camp? Is it just more going to be about roster changes? Like I don't have insight there. And to your second point about training strategies, I think that's a really interesting thing, and it's something I've thought a lot about. I think that Reaper's strategy when he was head coach was the review. Especially when the team was in a good kind of clip and there wasn't as much like band-aids that needed to be applied, he would have a short team review about one thing that he thought needed to improve about the team, like 5 to 10 minutes. And then we had Mithy and Freeze as assistant coaches last year. Then they were able to go and do their one-on-ones with bot lane or in the mid laner and things like that, and bring in concepts from other areas. And I think that's when a team's in form, and when later in the year, like for us that wouldn't work right now because there's a lot of like, you said this and I half understood it because it's not the best English phrase, or used the Korean word for this and that confused me. Like we're still at that stage, right? That we're not at the point where that's viable for us, but in the future, I'm a big fan of that, and I'm a big fan of bringing in concepts and going over them. But again, it's worth noting, and I have a presentation to players about kind of social media stuff later today, so I know this. It's a lot of players learn by doing. A lot of players can only use VODs as like inspiration to go play like immediately afterwards, rather than sit there and kind of sift through the info and like work through the theory and talk it out. That doesn't work for every player. So for the players who it doesn't work for, you have to kind of bring them to the trough to drink, and you kind of have to compromise a little bit. And for the players it does work with, you kind of let it kind of sift through. So I think there's definitely elements to it, and I feel like every org does it differently, and the balance is always different. But you're right in that there are definitely days where you play 6 meaningless scrims where no one learned anything, and if anything, you developed bad habits. Where afterwards, especially as a GM, where you're not like in their review on review, kind of going through the emotional baggage that creates, you're like, okay, so what did we achieve today? It seems like nothing from the outside. So for sure, there's work to be done. There's definitely not the correct balance on these things yet, Duncan.
I mean, I also think that a lot of the complaints have been that the lack of availability for drilling, because the tools just don't exist. Like Riot hasn't created necessarily the tools to like replay from certain game states. Or
they famously said they didn't want those tools to exist. Yeah, they actually said it would be unfair. So
I mean, all
these problems. Tools. Riot makes a decision at the beginning of the chain. Like Papa says, sets up a whole scene, and then they're like, "I'll unravel the whole thing." I didn't make you do it in the first place, mate. That doesn't work for me.
But there's times where Riot says stuff like that, and I don't even know if they believe it when they say it out loud. Like, I think they're just trying to like meet the fans where they are, or have a convenient thing that like heads off a conversation. Because like that is just utter bullshit. But someone said it, so that's the whole position of the company, and you know there are people below that public statement seething about it. So yeah, I mean, it was said out loud, but I think it was bullshit even at the time.
I mean, the reasoning was crazy. They thought the practice tool would create more toxicity. That people would tell each other in solo queue to go practice and practice tool, and that somehow would hurt people's feelings. But I mean, moving on beyond that, they did make it. But I'm just saying the drilling aspect of this game it makes it difficult to get meaningful practice a lot of times, because you can't actually drill in ways that a professional athlete would, for example. Like, you have to play an entire game. And you can't always even control your practice, because you go into a solo queue game and you're like, well, I need to practice this really broken champion. Oh, it's banned. You're like, well, how the fuck do I do this now, right? Or it's like, I want to experiment with this champion at this position. Oh, all my teammates are now tilted in solo queue and they're running it down because they think I'm trolling. Right.
No, in CS, we also, because the game naturally is more open to community sort of interaction, not the same way Counter-Strike itself was, but it's essentially you're allowed to run your own servers and to put your own things on there, things you can't do in League of Legends. They also in CSGO years ago invented all these tools. Like, the joke is, what you have as a sandbox mode, every single pro in CSGO for the last like 7 years warms up on a thing where it's just loads of bots at all different distances, and they headshot them all for like 20 minutes. That's just to warm your aim up. Then you have like retake servers where you just do retakes on the bomb when it planted, and you defend and you retake. Back in the day, it was shortly lived, but my agent even had a company that briefly was going called Boomio, where they invented a thing where it would even put you in 2 spots where you'd take certain duels on a map in Counter-Strike, and there was like 10 of these variations on a map, and it would just generate you through these particular cycles. So you take turns taking each of the fights you would take in a game against an opponent in the same spot. So like, these concepts, there are ways to actually sort of like make a sort, like we're saying, to streamline the practice, to practice exactly what you want specifically. I mean, you'll know this from, if you know StarCraft. Like, in StarCraft, every single Zerg player played that map where you had, I forget the names of the things now, but if everyone knows the Zerg air unit, what was that called? The one that fired the like little missiles down, and then the anti-air was the one that would fly into it, the Scourge, and blow it up.
Scourge and the Mutalisk.
Mutalisk. There was a map that was just you flying Mutalisk, and then Scourge chasing you, and would just learn the micro of that. So Koreans and other people who've been able to get the tech have been able to do this. Obviously, the issue here is we always have to ask Riot. Riot's the one ultimately that has the control, and if they choose to do it, they do it. If they don't, then it doesn't happen.
So the funny thing about what you're saying is something that just kind of came together in my brain as you were talking, is that, you know, when it comes to like warming up skill shots and things, sandbox mode does that. Like that's what the players are doing on stage before they play. But the biggest thing that's lost is like Baron setups or Baron turns and things like that, right? Like they're impossible. So like I was trying to think
races, there's a bunch of things you could do,
sure,
right?
Exactly. Like those things like so hard to simulate. Like you'd have to do like crazy things where you had like 40 PCs, more I guess 80 PCs in a room, and then like got them all to that point, and then like got past Lever Buster, pause the game or got past Lever Buster somehow, and then like swap seats. Like yes, that's a thing that could happen. We said it out loud, but like it's like comical to make it happen. The funny thing is that I guess what Riot could do that would instantly level up scrim practice for everybody, so it's not going to be like a North American exclusive advantage, is what if you could chrono break scrims? You know, like
you could also do from StarCraft VODs back in the day.
Yes.
You could go from that point and play it out again. Yes.
Yes, and I know this is going to derail into the baggage of Riot like announcing chrono break like it was something amazing, even though StarCraft had it forever. I'm just incepting that, but to the point.
We're not going to get chrono triggered. Don't worry.
No, good game. But the reason why I bring it up now is the downside to chrono breaking, and I guess fans might not fully have insight on this, but it takes a long time, right? It takes I think it takes 15 minutes to chrono break or something like that. It's at least 8. I think it's 8 to 15 minutes. Something like that. Is like that would still like ideally it was 0 minutes, but okay, it's 8, let's say, or 15. That would still be better than what exists right now. And being able to chrono break scrims, you could still at least have like a VOD review in those 8 minutes if it was predictable, and come back and like. Especially turns off Barons. Like, that's a big one, right? Is like, should we turn or burn? But turn or burn. There's so many variables. It's so hard to know.
I always say, Papa, I always feel so sorry for coaches in League, because there is no way to know exactly how to coach that scenario, because you just have to hope before the game that you understood it. And if they didn't, you can never do like you all say, like, hey, let's do that again. But remember, this time
changes every game.
Exactly, be perfect. Well,
it's also like my question about the chrono break was that is it one time it takes 8 minutes and then you can replay that game state? It takes 8 minutes every single time. Like you can't just once the game state is there, you can't just like save the file and then just restart it from that point over and over and over again.
I don't know that, but I do believe that. Yes, I do believe that it's every time. But in a world where, like because Riot's thing is always, okay, well, we could either be putting resources into something that's for all players or resources into only pro things, which is why Sandbox took so long, I guess, why Chrono Break wasn't there from the start. If they could only do one thing, finding a way to tighten Chrono Break or make it viable for scrims, like, again, the burn or turn thing, as Thorin is saying, is like, the variables are like how many dashes do they have, whose flashes are up, what skills do they have that can steal over the wall, like Syndra, QE, a cooldown. It's so many variables that like some players juggle very well, or they already have an impression before they start hitting the Baron. Thus, like 10 seconds later, when the contest comes, they can get there. But drilling it would just increase the overall proficiency, and I would love to see the overall proficiency on like objective turns match the overall proficiency of Lee Sin insect plays, or like where we are now with Chinese insects and things like that, with Lee Sin players. Is like that stuff is possible because one person can train infinite time, whereas teams cannot train viably infinite time on specifically objective turns. So if that was the one thing we could have right now that would level up all regions, like it wouldn't make North America viable. It would make Korean teams even better, and us like maybe like better. That would be very helpful.
I mean, if you go back in time and you watch the way that Lee Sin used to play, there are very standard plays that were extremely impressive back in the day that would be considered really standard now. But the reason is first off, the game was in its infancy, but also in order to practice a lot of these like flash plays, you would have to wait 5 minutes for your flash to come back up in order to try the mechanic again. So you just couldn't get the reps. So Practice Tool has done insane shit for player mechanics.
I just love where we're at now. I don't know if you guys, this is kind of like a niche thing, but there was a clip trending. I know Treats had a reflection on it recently of the fact that Elise Q doesn't go on cooldown if the unit dies during the animation. So you can Q a minion, smite it, and then you still have Q. So you can do like these crazy gap closes that like, because everybody has seen Elise since 2011 or 12, whenever this champ came out. You kind of know the engage range. You're never like, wow, I can't believe she repelled on me. Like, this range, like it's an innate thing, but you don't know this mechanic yet because it's new, and it's like reproducible straight away. Everybody understands how to use it. Everybody's like stress testing it. It actually is like it came out a couple years ago for whatever reason nobody noticed, and now like it's trending and everyone can see the clip. Everyone can get in the practice tool and practice it. Like that wasn't the case when Insect was debuting the Insect kick, 10 years ago.
Yeah. And there still is no globally available pool of replays for the teams, right? Like you get replays from your region.
So there is. It's improved. So the way it works now is that you can get Ruffle, which is the hilariously titled League of Legends replay file.
Right, so cute, aren't they?
Yes, they're so cute. Kawaii desu, etc. It's you can get major regions. LPL I think still has like the weird tech debt scenario, but you can instantly get 5 minutes after Next explodes of a pro game, you get Korea, Korean Challengers, Europe, North America, Academy, ERLs,
Is that new this year?
No, it was I don't know if it was partway through spring or start of summer. I want to say it was partway through spring last year. And it was actually not talked about a lot because I think some teams used it a lot. Like we used it a lot at 100 Thieves, and I think some teams weren't really aware of it because it's still a little bit frustrating because basically you have to have a TR installed that's that version of League of Legends. So you have to have like 5 TRs installed to like actually have historical replays. But getting in there and you're not getting POV. Like it's like 80% of what you want. Ideally, you're getting every player's POV, which I guess is impossible now that ProView is gone. But you're still getting the access to the things that pro teams hate. And let me tell you, pro teams hate the broadcast to watch the games because the replays are way too frequent and they're always off backs and rotations, basically. So you can never you'll get the replay and then like the support dies and you're like, is that because they didn't recall after the play was over? Like they decided they needed to like greed and share a plate with the team for some reason, and that caused the AD carry to have to overstay to kill a minion wave. Like these are the things that you really do train on, which is like base timings and getting out on the map with resources. And that is what the broadcast will always
it is
full screen replays over.
When I'm doing VOD reviews and there's this replay on the screen, I'm like, no, I need to know.
The OJ Simpson moment. I'm like, I think that what if this was the play they were thinking here? Whereas with the Ruffle file, it's perfect.
I'm like a forensic investigator.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, I have this circumstantial evidence. Maybe like they killed the minion wave in this way, and that, or like, how did these mid laners did a trade? Like, how did that happen in mid lane? But I guess one of them has to go back now. I guess we'll never know the reason why.
Yeah, I mean, now you get the Ruffle files 5 minutes afterwards. The new feature, I think it might be this year, might have been end of summer, is now you get your scrim Ruffle files 5 minutes after your scrims. Even it's not even just stage games, so not enemy scrims, just to be clear, the ones you played. So there's no weird stuff there, but we're getting there on things like that should have been like 2013 things, then 2023 things. So
hooray. Another one, Papa. Here's another 2013 thing. So in CSGO, another development that happened, it wasn't at the beginning, it was a couple of years in, and then it got more and more and more advanced, is both programs which you could put demos, replays if you're from League or other RTS games, you put the demos in and it can do things like it can either like strip the data out and show you in a different program, just like an overview of like in Counter-Strike, obviously you do the pissed around in a strat and setups and stuff, but you could do things like you could see in the League one, obviously you'd want to know like jungler's pathing, what routes does he take. If you put in the idea is with these apps, you can put in 100 demos and just find out, right, 99% of the time, here's the type of pistols they want to do. Yep. You can put in stats and find heat map data for every possible situation.
Look, you can ask you're making me jealous now.
Yeah, this guy's here and this guy's here and the other one has twice as much health, but he's elevated. He gets 47% of the time he gets the kill. Yeah, all that stuff.
It was the same in Overwatch League actually, because Blizzard made their own engine for the game, and so even in season 1 of Overwatch League, they would give replays to the team, and teams would just data mine the replay files and pull out all this information.
I mean, you're tilting me, Thorin, because my dream, because obviously I've always been trying to push for amateur teams and identifying talents from solo queue very young and things like that, is if I could you can get replay files of basically every solo queue game being played like above Diamond 1 or something. That's this thing you could actually pull if you would, but there's no ability to do what you would want. Like, for example, I'm like, all right, need the next stud AD carry. I want the best young AD carry on the ladder. You would want to have the ability to put it into a program that could model like the auto attack range of the AD carry,
Yes.
and then make sure that they're like attack moving perfectly and like they're always at maximum auto attack range and respecting the enemy's auto attack range and things like that. Like they'll always be kiting and auto attacking perfectly. You just crap in like, thousands of replays and it comes back and it's like this guy's spacing is the best, because spacing, I believe, is the most important strength of an AD carry, is to always be auto attacking, and denying the enemy's auto attack is like a very, very simple way of explaining it. But that doesn't exist, and it's like I investigated like how many programmers.
Send that clip to Reckless.
How many programmers would I have to pay how much to like create this sort of model? And it was like 4 or 5 full stack developers for a year to even consider how you would do it. And I'm just never mind.
What's so crazy is like, obviously, the whole MOBA genre came out of my first game that I was in esports, which is Warcraft 3, right? And at the fundamental level, Warcraft 3 and RTS replays, and even MOBA replays, because it was played on an RTS engine, are not actually that difficult to create or to parse.
They were tiny back in the day.
Because here's what an RTS replay is, guys. It is a timeline, and in that timeline, there are XY coordinates on the screen for where your mouse is. And then on that timeline, it records every XY coordinate of a mouse click and then a button press, right? So you can actually recreate the entire perspective of a player within Warcraft 3 or StarCraft or an RTS, which should be very easily possible within League of Legends as well. There are more players, but at the end of the day, when you look at a replay, it is basically the game replaying the actions of the player on a timeline is what
the obvious joke here is, but just like in Warcraft 3, if you want to unlock the best tech, you have to macro up and pick the right tech tree. And obviously Riot just has a bunch of grunts still in the village, isn't it, Monty? They haven't leveled up, have they? So,
how do you come up with this crap, Thorin?
Listen, it took 10 years. I had 10 years to get ready.
Jesus Christ.
He hasn't stopped talking in 10 years.
Something peon, something. I got it. Great.
There you go, exactly.
But it is wild, because like coming from this game where in 2002 we had perfectly functional replays, and then I'm here 20 years later in a game that is the same basically, and we can't even have these replays available publicly, is crazy.
I'm sad that you guys are not molding about the quality of like tower defense games in 2023 as compared to like Bourbonog tower defense as a Warcraft 3 mod, because like all the best mods, all the best tower defense were paid. Exactly, they were awesome back then. So why are we not talking about that?
Where's Footman Frenzy?
Footman Frenzy, sure. Bourbonog was better. But sure. Oh, someone mentioned Wintermall in chat. That was a good one.
That was a great one. But I mean, like, these games were amazing, and this actually goes to a different point. So I'm going to go super boomer here and yellow clouds. You ready?
Suits you. Continue.
I am going to say this, which is that all of the current like esports and popular game genres were developed as mods of other games, and it fucking blows that we don't have sandbox modes of current popular games for the most part, because that is where the genesis of great esports have come from, the community and grassroots development. If you think about it, right? We saw
video on this topic.
Yeah,
MOBAs.
Oh yeah, you did this?
I mean, for example, Overwatch comes out of TF2, which was a Valve game. Then you have, like, obviously League of Legends came out of Dota All-Stars, which was Blizzard. And then the joke is, this is the joke, and this is the reason that conclusion I came to at the end. This is why they all locked the games. Because the joke is they naively thought, but my rival took what could have been my property, but they didn't realize collectively all of them, Valve, Riot, and Blizzard, all did get a big game at least out of it. So it's short-term thinking, by the way. Classic LCS problem. Short-term thinking of like, but if I give it away, but actually if you share, I don't want to sound like Jesus here or something, you can receive back more later that you can't possibly. So the point is, if you open it up, you don't know what someone will do with it, but you might also benefit. Maybe you come and take a Valve thing later on. So that's why I think in the modern day, they don't open the SDKs and let people mod.
It's even that the genre, the latest big gaming genre is Battle Royale. That also came out of the founder of
H1Z1 or whatever,
doing
right?
an Arma 3 mod. Right. So like basically
Arma 2, I think.
Yeah, sure, whatever.
Counter-Strike came out of Quake. If people don't know it, every single one came from a different company, yes.
So I mean, all of the current popular even not, fuck the games, the genres, the tactical shooter genre, the MOBA genre, the battle royale genre, all of these came out of mods. All of them.
I don't know if you guys were around were either of you playing Dota when it was like new?
Yes, but the thing is, the joke is, Papa, I actually was one of the people. It's like what Richard said about League. I did just tell people this is never going to be big, because the reason why, if you remember, is because it was just a fun mod that was way easier to play than Warcraft 3. This is how everyone used to play Dota and find out about it in like 2005 or whatever.
Yeah.
You would finish playing the game you actually are a nerd in, Counter-Strike, what wasn't League? That's why I said League of Legends, StarCraft, I mean, or Warcraft back then, you know.
Right.
You'd play the hard game that you were pro, and Dota was the chill friends game because you had to make a custom thing. So what happened is a friend would just drag you in and you'd play it. And people like me from games like TAC FPS would be like, this is crap. Why am I controlling this one guy? Like, and why is he AFK? And I played it back in the day, but I thought it was shit at the time, actually.
So it was actually my college game. So 2005 is when I started university. So I was 18 at the time. And we had a good LAN setup, but the internet setup wasn't great at that time. I was ISDN or something like that.
Just when you were in Australia?
I was in Australia, correct. And so I was at a residential college, and our residential college game was Dota 1. And so what I can tell you from that time, because I played Dota 1 for like 2005, probably through 2006, I played it for like a year and a half or 2 years maybe, is that I was I was reading forums and kind of keeping up as much as I could, is that Blizzard had a really hard time working out what to do with Dota's success, because it quickly became like the supreme mod. Like, people were playing it and playing it, and it seemed to be trending more than Warcraft 3 Ladder at the time. That was just my perspective.
There was even a famous stat, I think, behind the scenes, Papa, that at one point in time the stats said, wow, Warcraft 3 is so alive, and the joke was like
Dota.
80% of the games where people played Dota.
And so
that was the joke.
So if you guys the easiest thing to pull back on now, I guess, to tell is eventually they did a Hall of Fame for mods, and Dota was the first one that they celebrated. But before that, it was already trending really hard at the time. Blizzard was having this really hard, this is so big, and like you say, it's kind of gussing up our numbers or cannibalizing our numbers depending on what they want to portray, and we don't own it. What can we do about it? It was kind of a begrudging recognition of it when they got to it. And then obviously Valve and Riot have had billions of dollars of success from this thing that Blizzard could have found a way to have. Blizzard could have controlled the market on it somehow and bungled it to the point where it ended up being an offshoot. And then we can get into Pendragon and forums being closed and things. That's way too grimmer for everybody here. But all I mean is I remember going through that and seeing kind of the schadenfreude that Blizzard was going through, trying to work out how to incorporate it. And then here we are now. But to your point, you're right. Everything is an evolution. Counter-Strike was obviously a thing, but my game was Action Quake 2 and things like that.
That's
and
what Counter-Strike came out of,
Yeah. So I remember playing those games and bandaging myself and thinking of how realistic and cool it was. And here we are with the forerunners of those games we played, I don't know, better part of 20 years ago, now being the preeminent titles.
Yes.
I'm just sad that we don't have, tools and sandboxes to create the next, kind of generation of games, at least in, now it's kind of the domain of B tier titles where you can actually do these mods. It's not the AAA games like it used to be that allow you to
this is why, Monty, if you go back in time, the most infamous one I'll do for Papa's sake for the old lore is that one time when Froggen did that comment on Reddit, he was toxic in solo queue, and then when people called him out on Reddit, he just sort of basically said, in so many words, sort of fuck you, I was busy practicing. And he had the most downvoted comment ever in the history of Reddit at the time, minus 2,000 or something. Because back then, of the fans, now, they would all be like, hell, he's toxic, this pro. And the joke is, Froggen was right, maybe he expressed it wrong. I used to say when I would come from the other game, to practice, you have to just load up a game, play a game with 9 randoms, and just hope you get valuable moments. And if someone does troll you, an actual pro, that's it. And even worse, in your game, when they told me this, mate, my brain almost exploded. They actually consider it Riot is potentially thinking about doing something if you smurf too much. You can't even go into the bad games. You have to play at the top level. I couldn't believe how limited the practice concept was. And I always used to say, as a pro, that must suck so much. As we're saying, imagine you are the jungler, you're trying to practice smites. How many cracks you get at that in a game? You know what I mean? It was just so inefficient back then. I mean, it's gotten slightly better, but even so, as we're talking about, it's never really been able to break out with some of these aspects, and partly because of the tech.
Yeah, and I think scouting is really hard too. Ruffles makes it better. So I think that now we're seeing some accurate imports, so Photon or someone coming in, the groupthink in Korean or English on Challengers Korea players, especially before there was even an English broadcast, it doesn't get huge viewership in Korea either, right? Like the groupthink is going to be limited on how good these players actually are, but a raffle will give you a little bit more insight on that and what the baselines are. But the gold standard is always POVs, and they're the hardest thing to get. You have to go through and hope that players are recording their point of view, where their mouse clicks similar to if they stream on Twitch. Korea doesn't even allow VODs of streams anymore on Twitch TV because of I don't know. So
The
getting
internet
POV
issues.
and the POVs you really want are the POVs of them under competitive stress, i.e., stage matches or scrims against really good teams. And you need multiple people's permission to get those. But when you get those, you see things like how crisp are their mouse clicks, how far away from their character is the mouse usually, and the closer they are to the character, the more tight their movement is. Whereas if you see a boomer POV, they're clicking to the corner of their screen or whatever, but the tighter clicks are always better. These are sort of things we were using at 100 Thieves to scout for our academy and amateur players. But they sometimes don't exist. Sometimes you're just please tell me you didn't delete your, it's off season, you didn't delete all the VODs. Please, these are still things that because we're in this state of incomplete information and you need to have gigs of storage because we don't have correct tools from Riot, you're still playing a game of telephone to get the things you want. And then League of Legends is a complex enough game that even if you had all of that, there's so much work that needs to be done to make out who is looking at this footage, who has an accurate opinion of them, what are the variables that are predictive of success. So every time we get something, which in this case is raffle files actually being available for more players to more teams, the floor goes up. It's never as much as it should or needs to, but it goes up. So that's you take the mere morsels when you're a starving man, I guess, is how it goes.
Here's the shit joke for you. They should have named the file name extension based on the region that it's played in. So maybe Europe's the funny region with banners. That could be the Raffle one. You could have Giga Chad for China or something. You could do all these. And then the joke is, obviously, LMFAO would be the LCS one. Because when I think of the LCS, I think of Party Rock is in the house tonight. Everybody just have a good time.
Oh, I knew you would hit the reference there correctly.
It's all right. That's a good one.
That's a good one.
You know what, Papa? The one thing I never do get credit for is I don't bloody trip over the joke. You have to actually land all the words, mate. You got to get it in the right order.
It's why you're a good caster and broadcaster. Is as you're talking and firming towards the end of a sentence, you're already working out the second order definition and things to extend it. That's a hard thing to do. As someone
but the thing is, though, I do a really good act of acting like I'm just an idiot who just accidentally tripped over and did it. So,
idiot savant, though. Idiot savant.
Yeah, exactly. Of course.
I want to get your take on the LCS broadcast this year, Papa, and because you've been a part of OGN, LCK, moving into now working with Riot directly on the LCS and seeing many years of LCS broadcasts. You've watched 10 years of broadcasts around the world. So what do you think about the changes that LCS has implemented this year? Are these things that you have liked to see? Were you worried about the start times moving? Because the viewership, I think, has exceeded most people's expectations for the movement.
I wear a lot of hats. That's why it's a hard conversation. It's better if you specify what you're talking about, because I watch as a fan. I watch as a previous broadcaster who has opinions on what should be in broadcast. I watch
that's why your opinions are interesting.
Or as an Oregona now, right? I have to think about this. So you can't solve for everything. So I have a lot of thoughts. Is there any particular strains you want me to zoom in on?
All right, let's start with the broadcast times, because that was a concern, but it seems to be doing relatively well. What were your thoughts about moving the dates and the times, and how have you evaluated it so far?
Oh, I think I was very, very skeptical originally when the idea of moving the days came up. When moving the days came up, kind of end of spring, I already knew that we were going to be talking about 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. kind of time slot. I knew it was not going to be evening because EST and Europe not being available, it's just not a decision you would ever make. So I was already thinking about how you're going to get people in the audience, et cetera, et cetera. I will say the most refreshing thing I've found with the change is I love playing on Friday, getting that done, and then being there's 3 days of LEC that I can watch at my leisure at a comfortable time. I don't wake up and find out I'm behind. It's not a match day and we're scrambling to work out why someone drafted the way they did in the patch earlier that day. I do like the fact that it feels more spaced out. Obviously, LCS takes a bit of an L moving to weekdays compared to weekends, at least in terms of theory. You're like, okay, well, theoretically, we'll have access to less people, et cetera, et cetera. But the old model of the viewer watches all of Europe and then all of North America, or like watches 3 games, like in a sitting, is not realistic. I don't think that's how it goes anymore. I don't have the exact data to like prove this. I've never been like specifically presented
expecting
that.
people to watch 10 straight hours of League of Legends on weekends was a little ridiculous.
There's a reason that Riot has like and ahhed about how they present data. I mean, part of it's just sometimes the data's not going up, so obviously you get creative around that. But the other part is like I'm pretty sure average viewing time has gone down over time, which makes perfect sense. The viewership is aged. That part is kind of like common knowledge, and so people have less time. And connected to that, I think it's more common to be like sports where you watch your team play, and that's like the sum of what you do. You don't actually, maybe you watch like the top teams and your team, but you don't watch all 5 games, which obviously, as we all on this call know, was what Riot wanted. Was that you watched? I'm an LCS fan. I watched the whole LCS broadcast, which I don't think that like 5+ hour chunk is what anybody does anymore. And then this idea of I watch LEC and LCS is like comically, like no one is watching 10 hours in a row. I say no one, obviously someone in the comments will get in there and be like, fuck you, I watched 10 hours. And it's like, great, your kind is dying.
I even think there's a reason that people don't bother to put in the background, because I always look for like second and third factors in the analysis. One of the reasons I think naively they might have thought that would work at the beginning, Papa,
is because
LCS was the way bigger region, and partly because it had all the streamers. They used to get 20K live viewers. That means some of those are European fans. That means they also want to watch the league. That doesn't exist anymore in the same way. Like those two things are separated. The things are smaller. Like we're just not in the old days, are we?
We're not, and it was novel at the time, and you wanted to watch it all because you never knew if it was going to disappear. Was the LCS a 2013 only product? Like no one could have the insight of where things would go. Now we're at the point where the fucking Challengers Korea broadcast has English. We didn't have anything at that time for LPL. Like it was us doing guerrilla stuff at the time. Before LPL, and even the first years of LPL weren't covered in English. Obviously, Korea always had an English broadcast, but now there's so much broadcast League of Legends. Now the quality, if you want to be a purist, you know which regions to watch. Obviously, Korea and China. So like the competition for time, and the fact that if the average age of the viewer was, let's say, 13, 14, 15 at that time, it's probably 21, 22, 23 now. Just kind of coming up with that number. And there's just much more competition for time. Just like we talked about spring being the better viewership time because there's less competition for your attention. As you get older, you have more things on your plate to be able to carve out time to watch a block of League of Legends, and a block goes from being 10 hours to 1 hour. And that's just the reality of where things are at. So I do like that the broadcast has times to breathe. I think the start time being pitched on 12 o'clock is like the maximum viewership time, and then it being pivoted to 2. That's the part where I'm like, okay, well, I don't know what the data is that supports that change, but it's a crowd pleaser. There was a lot of bad PR at the time, so a crowd pleaser still has its validity. And to your question about viewership, I think the viewership with no host has been very, very good, because I think that Riot did an extremely poor job of advertising the days changing, the time, all of these things. It was just very, very disappointing, and it's something that obviously have given feedback on before, during, and after. But given all of those, the viewership is healthy. Like people will say it's down, and it's like if you move any product,
it's actually amazing.
Days,
it's not down.
It goes
more.
down. Like I'm someone who's like followed professional wrestling a lot of my life for differing levels of severity in terms of following it. But I'm interested in the business, and there's a lot about TV ratings and stuff like that. That's always big discussion point there, which is very similar to Twitch viewership. And whenever it's like, oh, Raw is being delayed to Tuesday because there's a big football game on Monday night, so they're going to move it, then that creates scenarios where the viewership goes extremely far down because people showed up on Monday to watch it and it's not there. So the fact that they kind of, not secretly, but, covertly moved it to Thursday, Friday, and the viewership was like most of the way good, feels great. Now, in 6 weeks' time, we'll have more of a picture to how much of that was, early season push and new rosters and shine, et cetera, et cetera. But the way it's opened up is far exceeded my expectations, so I'm pretty stoked about that.
I also think that because they did such a bad job advertising it, there's always like a boost at the start of the season when people are hyped about the teams. But I think it's probably going to balance out because as more people get accustomed to this schedule, I think it'll probably stay about the same, even with the early season boost, right? Because you'll get the stragglers trickling in as they understand the timing and everything better. So I mean, I think it's actually a very positive change, at least at first. And Riot's theory, at least right now, looks like it was pretty solid.
Just like we're like bigging up FlyQuest and things like that, we are kind of like giving the roses to LCS in week 2, like in week 6, 7, 8.
I mean, when it's the mid of summer season, that's when it's going to be. That's like the doldrums where it becomes really hard to maintain the viewership.
I will just say, subjectively, winning the first game of the day on Friday, getting to watch the rest of the LCS at low stakes, and be like, okay, Saturday is my off day. I can watch some LEC if I want or not. Like that feels subjectively very good. Now, is that actually going to be like affirmed by viewership, which is something that's one of our big mandates and drivers? I need more time to understand, but it feels good so far.
And then, you want to talk about something in LCK?
Oh, hold up. Yes, in just a second. I want his take on the differences in the production quality and what you've seen, because that has also been the other push. And are you happy with that in terms of the way they're presenting your team? Because I think famously, one thing that I repeatedly railed on when you were with 100 Thieves is that they weren't doing a very good job of like representing Sunday's story, for example.
And it's going to be highly political now, but go for it.
Of course.
Well, I feel like I'm less political as I get older.
I think on this topic you will be quite political. I don't think you'll say the broadcast was shit. They never showed us. They cared more about like TSM and Cloud9. Even, I don't think you'll do any of that. So we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, that was one of my biggest internal pushbacks that I would talk about, is that the LCS broadcast for so many years was the story of Bjergsen and DoubleLift told again and again and again, so that you could just kind of like chase the most engaged players and like coast off their viewership, like cut off the top, which is boring. Like my favorite ever Worlds intro to a group stage was 2016 Worlds, where my first Worlds I worked, so obviously some nostalgia there, where they positioned Faker as the kind of like as the, not the enemy per se, but as like the foil to all the new people coming in, of like, this guy's already won multiple times, the final boss type. And I feel like you should always use your established stars that you built up to a crazy degree to build up your new stars. Then you just have more stars rather than just like,
it's how the UFC does it.
I love him. It's like, okay, well, at some point that's going to get old and people want new names. And I think that the LCS broadcast has done a terrible job of that. I would say recently they've done better. I think that ever since about summer last year, they've gotten better around trying to push new concepts. Maybe it was EG winning with Danny and JoJo that pushed it, but I think that overall it's been trending up. In terms of how they're featuring FlyQuest, I think they've done fine. I watch a lot less of the broadcast now than before, so I don't have the most nuanced take on it. I will say that the changes they've made to broadcast style, making it less ESPN, doing more skits. I get many more casters in my DMs saying like, hey, can we get a player for this? Or like, I had this idea, would this player be up for it based on the personality, like, people like Emily and Raz and these guys are trying to do creative things. They're making some flops along the way, but they're nailing in other ways. I feel like the talent team and producers they have working the show right now are the most receptive and the most creative they've ever had. And so let's let them get through some good and bad decisions and kind of see how it fleshes out, because I have a very different answer right now than I would have a year and a half ago when I'm like, this broadcast just sucks. I think it's a lot better than it used to be.
Agreed.
What we got? We got more topics. I'm
waiting for Monty to finish all these important topics about the broadcast, right? Should we actually talk about people who are good at League of Legends now?
Yes.
Half an hour maybe at the end, squeeze it in. Fucking hell. So, okay, one thing I would like to talk about, and the reason I want to talk about it with you, actually, Papa, is because you are actually someone who is known to not be someone who has like, you can have like, a strong take, but I don't think you ever. I think you quite very intentionally, very rarely have a hot take. Like you actually do seem like you want to think about it more. You even, I notice when you're forming your take, you will almost try to like intentionally see all of the sides of it, and so like a bit like when I was talking about the riot.
I was at that as a caster too, right?
Yeah. Oh, you were, absolutely. And so what I would ask you is this. At the moment, a massive topic of contention with LS's crowd particularly, but also the pro players, there's a lot of those LEC players who come in, is, believe it or not, right now, I'm not exaggerating, there is a problem in League of Legends I have never seen ever in the history of the game, and I've watched Korea the whole time, which is genuinely Korean support players. By the way, the position I think they have been the best at forever in League of Legends, even better than LPL when LPL was winning. That's the one position I think they have always dominated because of the vision control, because of the way you like control the lane, you control the fights, the team fights, the skirmish. That's the one position I've always thought was the ultimate brain Korean position. And they are actually unironically being so inefficient right now with all these million pink ward buys and refusing, and even like 2-3 pink ward, and two rather, and refusing to complete items. That the joke is, I actually think if you look at it, as much as people meme on the LEC supports are like actually like meta-wise ahead at the moment. They're not doing these things. So the crazy angle, if people don't know, is in Korea, essentially, it's some of them, it's really insane. Every time they back, they just buy the wards. I've even seen them do it, buy the wards, when they're like defending the base and they're going to lose the game. It's like, look, I get the premise again of, if we hold off the fight, then we make a video. But it's like, whatever they've done, they've gone way too far with it. And the reason why I feel like it's so crazy is because there was a period in time back in the day in League of Legends where the joke was that is what made Koreans gods, is that even like the joke was a Korean mid laner would buy some wards when, the Western player would get the damage. Like that used to be what made them OP. But at the moment, it does seem, and I'm a layman here, so I wouldn't get the people who are the experts. It seems to me like a crazy angle where they're just bizarrely on a totally different direction of what they think League is. And everyone else is going the other direction, it seems.
Yeah, I don't want to overrepresent my game knowledge at this point, right? Because I'm now like one further order removed
quick
from
start, okay. There's
the game.
games where people buy 20 pink wards back.
No, and I know the argument. Like I still follow League. I'm not saying I'm like a peasant now, but I'm not going to say that I'm an expert. What I will say is, if you remember, he was getting a lot of criticism for this on Soraka, super delaying his Moonstone during summer finals, buying control wards. So I definitely understand that. It was a topic then, it's a topic now. It feels like the latest kind of like crusade that LS is on. Leandry's obviously being the most famous one. I think that it's a super interesting argument because I agree with the premise of, if you're playing an enchanter and like, a healing support, especially with the power level Moonstone was at previously, maybe it's different now, but getting a mythic as a support is really, really impactful in the game. Like all fight situations play out differently. There's no split pushing. Everything turns into fights. So having your fight situation starter begun will meaningfully impact team fights and whether you win. And delaying that for mindless control wards is objectively bad. Like I didn't agree with Jay doing it, but it wasn't my position to come in as like the third order person to be like, what's going on? I just talked to my coaches about this. Is weird. We had Busio in our academy at the time, and he was a lot more on the LS school of thought of like wanting to get your team fight power ready to go and things like that. So we had natural disagreements even among the two supports. We had 100 Thieves. And when I look at the cases, like the comical cases you're talking about, the one that LS molded about recently, where like Beryl is like buying 2 control wards when everybody is gonna just be in his face, Yes, it's like, what are these gonna do? So like, I'm with you guys on that. And then probably like the League analysis that I took the most away from in the last year, from watching clips and co-streams and things, was Dom actually talking about how Lucian Nami was used in LPL and how vision denial in LPL is used. It might have been in a show with you, Thorin, so if I say anything off, feel free to correct me, but it was along the lines of like, in the LPL, if you get first set up on an objective and put down control wards, that's seen to like overcome item disadvantages or anything, because positioning is so important, right? But then the Lucian Nami point was like, yes, obviously this combo is strong at level 3 and level 5 and mandate and all these power spikes, but the use case of it is if you control ward both sides of the river, no one can ever walk up like 0.1 centimeters outside of their turret on the enemy side if they can't see you, because with mandate and Lucian's full combo, you're just like dead from anywhere. Basically, you can't even flash away because you just get cold. And so the map control Lucian Nami brings, in addition to control wards, is very powerful. And so we hadn't discussed Lucian Nami being used that way, or we hadn't discussed like what is the break even between like an item or XP advantage and control wards. Like, it's not a topic that naturally gets kicked off, but I thought it was a very interesting summation of it. And you can understand then then you need the control wards to get a setup because we're behind, and like if that's the only way we can get ahead, then let's I need the wards, and you get like the thought, but it's like it's being over applied, just like the Ludens and other items are being over applied compared to Liandry's in the past.
Right.
So it just, to me, it's the truth of the matter when LS was on his crusade is that he was overstating the point, and some people were right in their item builds when he was calling them out on it for going Liandry instead, but people were not being critical thinkers about their items enough, and the floor of critical thinking around items meaningfully was changed by LS blanket flaming. So like the end result was a positive one. I think the same is true of buying control wards. Very often people will buy 2 because they had the gold when they should buy 1. Very often supports will have 300 gold and then be like, well, I'll buy 2 control wards and still have 150 because I'm a support. I don't have a lot of items. I don't want to float gold because I have low base stats and low items. But it's also like, well, what if you only win when you get the item and now you're delaying that time by buying this control ward that you didn't really think about? You just kind of bought it because you have a small wallet and you finally got some money and you're like buying too much. Like, there's critical thinking required there that very often isn't happening. And I think it's starting to happen more. And it's a shame that it takes a tastemaker shouting it, indiscriminately to make it happen. But at least it's happening. Like, it's better that it's happening than not.
It's also just very entertaining. I mean, his reaction to Beryl buying those wards was
he's very compelling
hilarious.
character for sure.
I thought it was really funny. But it also, I think, misrepresents. I mean, this was my problem when LS was doing this with itemization, is like the blanket flaming, as you're saying, was effective and did cause critical thinking. But you guys have to understand it's performative. And at the end of the day, the other thing that LS really attaches himself to is things that individual players can change, because the nuances of the professional game are beyond the understanding of most of his audience. And so when I've been doing VOD reviews on my streams recently of LCK teams, it depends team to team. So it really is about efficiency with those pink wards. And so sometimes, as you guys, if you've been watching Bangers Only, like I thought KT was buying a lot of pink wards. And when I went back and actually looked at the control ward stats that KT was buying, it turns out they were not buying that many, but they were using them. The efficiency was insane. They are very good about recalling to control ward around a dragon, and there will often be 5 control wards on the map, and they'll be sweeping out. So, but they weren't in total. The total number of control wards they were buying was not very high. They just have very good timings on their control wards, right? And you also have to consider, what kind of composition are you playing? If you're playing a pick comp, control ward value is enormous, because it is more important that you kill someone before a fight starts with the pick comp, rather than having an item in a losing 5v5 anyway, right? If you're playing a front to back 5v5 team fight composition, itemization may be more important than control wards. But if you're trying to play into that comp with a pick comp, you need to stop them from getting to the objective before you get there, and pink wards are very good at that. Another example, right now, statistically, here's something fun for you. Gen G, arguably the finest macro team in the LCK, buys the fewest number of controlled wards per minute, but has the highest wards cleared per minute of any team. That is crazy good efficiency. Are we going to complain that Gen G is buying too many control wards? No, we're not.
The problem is, though, like, I'll tell you one obvious reason why this has blown up as well, which is, it's not a joke. The worst defender is Beryl. He is not only an active, he is a 2-time world champion. Like, this guy, look, he's obviously, as an actual player, not like the greatest support ever, but the resume is incredible. So if you are that player, and then you are the guy for real, where you're just like buying them constantly. And by the way, Monty, you can go watch some of these VODs. Dude, the joke is, it looks like he just gets his bonus based on his vision score at the end of of the game because he will just put pinks that don't even make sense, mate. He will put like one in like this is not a joke. He even has put them into brushes that he saw enemies walking into that they just kill it instantly. Like this isn't, you're not even thinking when you do that. You know?
And I know where you're going, which is like it creates appeals to authority when world champions or
if you don't, I don't know if you know this. I have heard that if you have a Korean player on a Western team, watch out for this, homie. I've heard the reason why it's so hard to convince them to do something different is they will go, and this is all they say to you, and they think this is checkmate. They will go, Carrier does it in Korea. You know, fucking back in the day, it would have been Smeb or, you know, whoever the perfect player is. If he does it, there's a lot. That's why the Leandris thing essentially came down to that. If you ever asked the players, it was like, well, that's what Chovy buys, you know. So that was really like, that's not, to me and you, that's a fallacy. To young people who don't know how to critically think, they might think that's an argument.
I think I was just about to bring up the same point because Barrow does it, because Carrier does it, is you say it's like a Korean thing. It's just a thing. Like this is how young players who come up in the information age with all these regions covered and like a much more global read than just like, well, I kind of watch the LCS and play solo queue. Like no one really does that. They watch a little bit of all regions and highlights and bangers and play solo queue. And so the appeal to authority is what you hear from players who don't have a true opinion on things is I did it because Beryl did it, or I did it because Carrier did it. And I think the moment that you detect that that's a reason that someone is, that's not a justification. Like those people doing things is not, and it's on the coaching staff and the culture to instantly push back on that because it's not informational. You know, like here's what I'll tell you: because Carrier did it as a support, and I'm doing it myself, applies to like 0.001% of the players out there. He's incredibly mechanically blessed for a support player. He's so outclasses other support players in terms of mechanics that he breaks the game and breaks scenarios. He's the Uzi of his day, where Uzi, if you remember in season 2, the argument was, wow, what an amazing outplay. How did he do that? And everybody, the other side was, why the hell was he there? No one should ever be there to make that outplay. And I feel the same way with Carrier is like, because Carrier does it, literally, you just have to look at the person and be like, okay, then are you Carrier? Because I don't think you are. And I think that's something that needs to humble people. The Beryl one is a very interesting one because I think mechanically is obviously not Carrier by any means, but his shot calling is something that I can't quantify because I'm not listening to the comms, and his impact in terms of leaving the team is such that I don't think he's smartly buying 2 control wars at all moments, but I'd love to get a beer with him and work out why he's doing it.
Of course, yeah.
I just don't know.
You know, that's the one thing I do actually find is kind of a bit sad about League is that, like in CSGO, I'm sure you know this, everyone doesn't just flame me if they disagree with me. Probably 90% of the time, they hop in your DM and they just say, like, look, in that scenario, you're right. Like, I can see how it looks stupid, but, you know, what I was trying to do was this, or the other team normally does something else in that sense. And that information is obviously mega useful, but the downside is we don't have the access to get that information from the LCK and LPL players. So we're always wondering.
Whenever I get little morsels, whenever I grab Song during a break and ask him questions, it's always great. I've got a couple of sources now, so trying to find out the most I can about some of these things you just can't know.
So yeah, I mean, I think the ward question is interesting, and there are like really egregious examples, and all of this started with Malrong last year as well, when Malrong was, you know, sacrificing
random sampler items as well.
He was spending 2,000 gold as well.
I actually love
on
Malrong,
wards.
so Malrong just like plays the game his own way, and I love watching him play, and that's part of his strength, and you just have to take it.
But I love people. It was fun watching people copy his item builds and not his style. And it's like, okay, well, he's building those items so he can dive better. So if you're full clearing with those items, we got a problem here, guys.
That's why the point you made earlier is the key. And I actually think there's a very logical reason as to why the players have an issue. This reminds me, dude, of when they first brought in the dragon meta in League of Legends. I think it was season 9. And when they first brought that in, a lot of teams still didn't people didn't overnight just figure out how you play the meta. It took people ages to figure out, are you supposed to focus on all the dragons? Do you let some of them go? Can you side lane? We thought not at the time, but you sort of could. And it's like the problem is you'd spent the last 7-8 years playing a different game, and all your sense of what was right and your incentive structure in the game was different. So the problem here is this. I actually think back in the day, there were genius players who didn't complete items because that part of the item was a waste of money, or you don't need it for, you're not going to use like this particular part of the damage. Maybe you're using it for like movement or health or something. You just do the ruby crystal. The problem is this is all combined within the modern day. The mythic was almost like because they wanted everyone to buy them, it just became the slam dunk. Like the first one to get it was always the one pretty much had the advantage. Like it was a very rare example of something intentionally being OP in the game. And by the way, you could even make an argument, I probably would. I think that's actually sometimes a negative. Like I remember the classic example in StarCraft 2 was not only was the Infestor OP, there was never an incorrect amount you could build. And that is a nightmare scenario in a strategical thinking game. You want it to be where there's a balance. So the contrast in StarCraft, if you don't know, was like the obviously whatever the Archons or whatever. No, not the Archon. What's the fucking Storm? What's the one that does the storms on Templar? There you go. The Templars, you can definitely have too many. If you have too many, you supply that. You don't want too few. Like, that's how you want these things to do. So the problem, I think, in the modern days, remember, we didn't have mythics until a couple of years ago. Like, people, again, have played their whole life in this game. And if you're Korean, by the way, you might have put like 50,000 hours in the game. So your brain thinks the game's like this. And it's still pretty similar. But actually, certain aspects, in this case, the tech tree, is totally different.
Well, it's also the mythics snowball, so they become more gold efficient as time goes on because they have passives that stack with the more items you have.
It's interesting. I mean, the game does have these kind of things that are just done because they're done rather than truly thought out. Like, I loved that right at the tail end of Yuumi being a champion, we saw that the Guardian Yuumi's like farming up their gold item in like 5 minutes just because they could be detached more, play more aggressively, and that's like a last second tech before Yuumi's nerfed to existence for at least the foreseeable future. And I do think that people use runes and items shortcutted through, famous players using them to just not have to put too much thought into that. And I think maybe that's fine for players, but it's not fine for analysts and coaches who allow those things to continue without there being critical thought. Like, someone in the decision tree needs to have some critical thought. Otherwise, you get these hilarious moments where people are just playing suboptimally and they don't even know it. That's the biggest problem there. There's a lot of people to detect that they're playing suboptimally or building suboptimally that aren't.
But isn't the reverse true, where there's also like a universal clapback as a result of this? Because you have to deal with a scenario where players are then pressured to maybe make suboptimal decisions the other way, right? Where there is a good reason to buy these pink wards right now because of a compositional structure or because of a strategy or because of a timing window. And now the fans are getting, shitting on them. And that actually potentially changes the way they play the game.
Monty? In general, I do have a rule in life that you should never give advice to someone you yourself don't follow and hasn't worked for you. So I can, in a very rare turn of events, actually tell you the advice I would not only never have given, because I would have thought it was obnoxious, but I couldn't have because I would be a hypocrite. You know what's brilliant, Monty? The other way around, where you can choose to have like input that helps you, but you can choose not to have all the bad input. You can just turn Twitter off.
Yep.
Go look at my Twitter. What have I done for the last 4 months? What have I done for the last 4 months? I haven't had any beefs, any dramas. I haven't replied to anyone. I've done it. I've actually lived that. I've gone teetotal, as it were. And I was the hell of an addict. Listen, I've had a few moments I thought about having a lost weekend. Classic movie reference, 1945, look it up. But I didn't do it, Monty. I didn't get the secret bobbing out of the window, plant pot, I didn't do it. I stayed clean. Now I'm just an asshole on talk shows instead.
But people actually have to watch the content to call you out, and they can't take it out.
By the way, genuinely, all I'll say is if you're a young pro, that would genuinely be my advice. Either one, don't ever read it. Two, if you have to read it when you're in the best state of mind. You just had the greatest breakfast, good sleep. You've even thought before, like, now remember, this might be nonsense, Third option, I would say, and this is a very real one. If you're one of those people like a Bjergsen, I would do this tomorrow. Just hire someone to filter it for you. Just hire someone. They'll do it for pennies, and you can pay them well anyway. You make millions, mate. So I think genuinely, I would just give that a piece of advice, because I agree, Papa. The downside of this approach, and it isn't totally LS's fault. LS by himself by the way, is a prisoner of this as well, and certainly he's constantly having the mob turn back on him. The downside is, yes, when he empowers, essentially what he's doing is he's giving people a scalpel to cut apart and diagnose his situation. But a lot of people use it as a dagger and just run at the player and start stabbing them.
Here's the analogy. Here's the analogy, guys. So LS is a doctor, right? He is capable of diagnosing these particular things. He's extremely knowledgeable about the game. You motherfuckers are the ones going on WebMD and reading what he wrote and then trying to diagnose everybody off of that. Stop fucking doing that. You are idiots.
Well, I mean, look, the truth of that is, and I think people kind of understood this around the Leandries, is it's a way for fans to be on an equal power level, because obviously they can't click their mouse as good or play the game as good as the people they're watching. That's why they're viewers. but they can build items. It doesn't require any skill to click on something. So because of that, it's a very nice equalizer where you can feel empowered. You're like, oh, I know this, and this is wrong. And sometimes they'll be right, but they'll over apply it because the nuance of the why is not going to be as iconic as the this mask good, this item trash kind of like dichotomy that whenever you're playing for content, you're gonna be a heightened version of yourself or over deliver it or give it, and that's just the relationship that happens there. So I think when you get perspective on that, and as you get more experience as a pro, hopefully you get perspective on social media or you have people around you to help. I hope you can play to your strengths, because I think for some people they can't turn it off like you managed to, Duncan, or won't make that choice until it's too late. But in terms of setting your social media usage up for success, i.e. knowing when the good time is to read and when the good time is to step away, I think that people do mature to that more frequently than we might know from the outside.
Thing is, though, there's the other side of the coin, which is also why there's value to this, which is the other assumption always was, I'm not pro, they're pro, therefore it's another version of the appeal to authority. They must know more about the game. They must know it better. Well, they know they're better than you. And I can tell you that is where LS has quite frankly broken through this and been able to have times people lauded him as more correct than the pro on a topic. That's very rare. Like, I won't go into the whole side thing. I've got a whole video on my channel of it. But I actually have a video where I explained at the beginning of the current economic meta in Counter-Strike Go that literally nearly all pro teams were playing out these situations in a very inefficient way, because basically what happened was the defensive CT weapons just cost so much, and it was so costly because this T economy was so cheap that essentially the T could constantly sort of play a war of attrition. And if you were the CT, well, Counter-Strike, you think to yourself, I just have to win the round. That's a score on the board. No, it's the guns you buy in the next round.
So what
would actually happen essentially it wasn't that you have to try and win the round, like, right, we won the 1v1, cool, you won the round, but we don't have enough money to buy the guns. You actually needed to win the round and have like 3 people alive with a gun to make the next round even for you. So what that meant is people were playing scenarios like they were at even strength based on what side they were on. But actually, if you understood like poker theory, they were making a negative EV play, and they were even putting themselves in scenarios where the best case scenario for them didn't actually give them like a winning situation. It put them behind the 8 ball a few times, as it were. You don't even have to know Counter-Strike to get the premise, hopefully, on that.
So the anecdote I can give to bring it to League is I cast Overwatch for a little bit, and then in Overwatch, I can't speak to current Overwatch, but this is like, I don't know, 2017 or whatever. Like the whole idea of staggering deaths, right? Like you didn't want to like kill everyone at the same time so they all respawn together. So if you could stagger, especially like the Reinhardt who needs to be at the front with the shield, you're going to get a huge advantage out of that. There was examples in League. I cast like an LCK game that same week or next week where they kind of comically were not killing someone so that they wouldn't respawn in time for Baron. But no one had said that before on a league game, right? They'd never said that. It was very much like, oh, they're playing with him. He must hate him in real life or something. Like they're styling on him and dabbing and things. But actually, it was like purely strategic moment with just how that game played out, and
like around like a dragon respawn, for example.
Correct. It was. I think it was a Baron take, but it was very much that. And then 4 of them respawned, and then whatever the frontline initiator didn't, and so the Baron was a lot harder for them to contest. And that's a much more normal thing to see in games right now. No one would ever ascribe personal intent to not killing someone if it was strategic to it. But it took me casting Overwatch, getting into that being the core mechanic of that game, to understand it in this game. So it's possible. I must have missed it. I'm not saying that was the first time it ever happened, but commentating on it and aggrandizing that and it becoming more normalized for viewers and thus players was all kind of a byproduct of this Overwatch experience.
What you're talking about is essentially formalizing it as a principle, which is one of the things I do appreciate generally about how LS does things. He tries to have a coherent principle that he applies to the game. By the way, as a quick aside, I still think currently in League of Legends, my region LEC has an enormous problem with exactly this style, which is it drives me crazy, Papa, the way they treat all kills as equal and they go for every kill they can get. And the amount of times I've seen a team that is leading in farm, has the comp that would win the dragon fight and control it, chases a support that oversteps 40 seconds before, they blow 2 flashes, an ult, they kill him, and it's like that, and sometimes lose the like in this scenario, like the jungler dies, but they get the 2 kills. It's like, if you actually understood your like bigger macro play, that was, again, if your joke is you opt out that if you could. You actually would leave the kill. You'd say, fuck, make them come fight us at the Baron or at the Dragon later, right?
I mean, the word discipline is used in a lot of different ways, but it's undisciplined to over pursue,
Yes.
into fog and die, right? Like, everyone gets that, but it's also undisciplined to use your ult, your team fight winning ult 30 seconds before a Drake if it's going to have a 2-minute cooldown. It's also undisciplined to trade flashes if you're an AD carry most of the time, just because the next team fight you might be useless, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that in reviews is
by the way,
reviewed.
you know, when I was saying earlier about doing theory, that's what I mean by the theory, Papa. I want people to have principles. Like, this is how we play. We play this style. We do these things. So the idea is he's not thinking, well, last time I was against Liv. He's thinking, like, in this situation, our team, this is how we do it. Do we play defensive for the Baron? Maybe we are the team who goes balls to the wall and says, screw the objective. Maybe we want them to get in the war of attrition if we're behind, you know?
I will say that I think the floor on that level of like bad decision making is increasing, again, partly because people are pointing it out. It is also always discussed in scrims. I would say on stage it's a little bit different because there's the noise and it's just a little different environment, so not everyone catches up on it. But it's definitely been like a kick you've been on and a kick that I think has been improving in teams. So the floor on that also will increase because it's an extension of lack of discipline to overuse abilities that you can't have then for a critical fight.
And I think that most people like still don't understand that a lot of the fights in a neutral game state, when there aren't objectives to be taken, especially as you roll into like Dragon Soul Point, a lot of the vision control and the fighting that goes on is simply to blow summoner spells or critical ultimates so that you can fight around the next engagement. And it's not a sexy way to play League of Legends, like seeing an AD carry blow flash a minute and a half before before the Dragon Soul Point comes up because there was a vision trap, doesn't seem super impactful to the casual fan, but that is what good Korean and Chinese teams are playing.
It's just not it's not sexy, Monty. Like, even just something that I think you and I could have done better as casters was this whole like, when like an AD carry walks up onto mid wave to push it, Jarvan comes from the bush, ults, they flash. There's never any kill chance on that AD, right? Like, they're always gonna flash. We didn't really talk about it like, oh, there's like a 3.5-minute power play that's somehow like accentuated on the screen, and it's like, hey, this AD carry not having flash, it's not an Ezreal, it's an Ashe. They don't have a dash. That's gonna decide the next fight. They're gonna give up a Drake because of this. Like, finding ways to like actually like visually and in commentary kind of like, obviously we did the same thing of like, wow, like there's a lot lower cooldown on Jarvan ult than flash. How great. Like, it wasn't like celebrated.
Well, the game also wasn't as advanced at that point.
Correct. All I mean is like, if we could have found a way to push that and like the everybody understood it, it would have increased the floor of knowledge for players. Yeah. It would have been a core principle, and it now is becoming a core principle, or maybe is a core principle, but it's like, it's nuanced, and that's the truth of League of Legends. It's the burden of knowledge is so fucking insanely high, and only gets higher.
Thing is, though, Papa, I will say that's also why I do think places like an LS stream is the appropriate place. You go there if you're hardcore and you want to go that deep. Sometimes on the broadcast, like, you would just bore the casual fan if you did that too much. Like, I'll give you another example. If you're a casual fan who watches CSGO, a classic map, it'll always be there, is Inferno, right? If you watch the meta for the last 4 years, both teams go there and just throw loads of utility, and they don't go into the Molotov, they don't go into the smoke, they get flashed and hold back. Now, if you watch that, you'd go, why don't they just not throw it, or why waste it? They're not wasting it. Like we're talking about with the concept of baiting out ults. If I throw this smoke, he has to throw the counter one to stop me going through. So you do this as the terrace, for example, to know at the end, right, you can only have one smoke on that site. It's a way of baiting out resources, making an information play based on process of elimination, and then you get the better scenario for you. But as the fan, the casual fan's not going to be able to engage with that point. He's just going to see the guy with the crosshair. He's not having a fight. This is boring. He won't get it.
And like, one of the things I've been doing on my stream is I think I've watched all of the Gen G matches that have taken place so far this year, because I think that one of the worst things about Gen G is this narrative about like Chovy just playing for farm, which it really just takes away from the fact that Gen G is so good at prepping minion waves and thinking like 2 minutes into the future. And they do things like TP onto minion waves to sync waves a minute before Dragon, so that the side lanes are both pushing at exactly the same time into the enemy to get them vision control to take a Drake. And these things you don't even see them on camera on the broadcast. It's like here on the minimap, Chovy's TPing, and he did it as Doran is syncing.
You don't even see that TP because it's not a sexy TP. It's in the replay, Monty. It's in the replay.
I literally have to go. It's not even in the replay, right? Because it's a minute before the Dragon fight. So no one ever sees it on camera, right? So I have to go back, and I like literally the other day I was like, look, guys, Genji isn't sexy. I'm going to take you back to this other point earlier this year when they were playing against Breon. Look at this Silas teleport that goes from Genji's inhibitor to basically their tier 1 turret. And it's like half a map TP, and he uses it at this timing because they are syncing these waves so that they can push at the same time. So then they get all the vision in the jungle, which then causes this pick, which then causes an uncontested Drake. And you don't like seeing this, but this is how Genji plays. And Chovy is fucking so map aware. He is so map aware.
I think so. We're gonna upload basically an LCK Mad Movie style comms replay of our weekend, and we didn't really have a lot of like big outplays or like 1v1s and things. But the clip on there that I think you'll appreciate is there's a moment in our game against Golden Guardians where Prince is looking to back, like the play is over. He puts down a control ward and sees that he's on vision, and basically in comms he like fake backs basically, like just. It looks like he plays around the vision, going away from the Golden Guardians ward, and then dashes over the corner and calls his team and is like, hey, they're going to come clear this control ward because they're coming away from base. I know the support's going to be here soon. Let's pick him, and that's going to be the game-winning play. And the game-winning play is him playing around vision falling off, getting a pick on the support, and from that we get like Drake and 2 turrets and things like that. And it's a very nuanced play around vision going down that's like visualized and communicated well. And plays like that, like the broadcast can't know in one time. You need like lots of different information. But plays like that are really, really sexy. Like you win games off that, you know, like. And that's hard to say, and that's what we're going to try and show with like our things is like how at the very highest level with everything working together, the game has some amazing individual moments.
Yeah, it's times like that. So I'll let you know, we're going to release a top 5 plays. We're starting to do top 5 plays, professional plays every week on this channel. So you guys are going to see that later today after we get off this episode. And the top play that I picked this week is something that happened off camera. And what happened was in the game that Chovy was playing, who were they up against this past week? It was their game versus Live Sandbox, right? So closer, Chovy's playing Rise, okay? And he's playing into closer's Cassiopeia. That's been a very good matchup for Cassiopeia. We've seen it as a counter pick, right? It is about 13 minutes and 45 seconds into this game. So he cannot TP for this turret dive. So his team stacks a wave, and they're 4-man diving top lane, right? So they're 4-man diving top to try and get an advantage. He is walking from base into river. He is level 10, so he has level 1 Rise ultimate. He cannot realm warp under the turret in time, and he can't TP to the minion wave, and he can't TP to the ward because it's pre 14 minutes. Cassiopeia in mid lane, who doesn't know where Rise is, assumes probably Rise is walking top lane to be a part of this play. Starts teleporting. Chovy makes a snap decision knowing he can't realm warp in time. And if Cassiopeia ults his teammates under this turret, they may lose this game. Instead, he just realm warps to Cassiopeia, rune prisons her, stops her from going in. The dive kills the top laner and jungler on Live Sandbox. They get a bunch of plates. They snowball this dive into a win. This is not on camera. It's not on camera. And yet it is an insane play that Chovy makes because he has to take into account, oh shit, it's like 15 seconds until I could actually TP. Oh shit, I have level 1 realm warp. I'm 1 level away from getting level 2 realm warp where maybe I would have the distance to get up there. Oh, I happen to see Cassiopeia. I make a decision quickly enough to channel realm warp to get there to cast W. It's fucking nuts. And like, that's the strength of Genji.
Yeah, I mean, stuff like that is so much harder than like, a button press outplay. And I think that broadcasts are getting better at showing that, and team content is as well. The more players we have who can weigh variables and make decision-making things like that versus just outhands people, like those two things will eventually like combine, and then again the floor of the game gets higher, and it's why I have that. We all here, I mean, mostly Monty and I, but Duncan begrudgingly have this long love affair with League of Legends. Is that it's a game that you can invest further and further into and find nuances and learnings and feel better about the time you've invested in it and appreciate it more. And that's what all good esports should be. I think anything that you invest your time in and it rewards you and motivates you to put in more are special. It's why I've stuck in this field for so long, is that I feel it's rewarding in that way.
By the way, another thing I also think is the reason why it's actually one of the first things I appreciated about Monty when he was doing it. He was trying to come up with concepts like rotations and things like that. Is it's a different style of academic research, guys. Like the pro player, if you have traits on, maybe he knows everything about like the support picks in Europe and how bot lane matchups work, right? He has to spend all day doing that to be the best at that and have that knowledge. He can't simultaneously know everything about item aspects. Like LS, if you don't know, is doing it from the Magic the Gathering / trade card meta understanding of it. Like, it's why, to me, the silliest angle of all is beyond when they do it for WWE beef, is when these people attack each other because the other guy has a different lens on the game. I call them lenses and models. Like, you pull one lens into, like, put it this way, you need a telescope and a microscope. You can't see everything with a microscope. You can't see everything with a telescope. You also need a great raw eye 20/20 vision. You know what I mean? Every single thing has a different aspect. And the joke is we need all these people in the scene. We need Ellis to have his crazy crusade over here. We need Papa to have a more reasonable take on some historical thing. We need me to have a spicy take that maybe gets rebuffed sometimes when I go too far because it's some Swedish fucking guy who's a little princess who maybe he's mad overrated and he's not even that Greek guy. Who's like, oh, I got lost in something for a second there. And you need them all. You need them all. That's why I just like unique people, by the way. I like people who have their distinct sort of their own philosophy on the game.
I feel the same way about when I hire staff and things like that. Is I love people who have very defined strengths, who like put everything into those and build them up and continue to grow in those areas. I don't need all rounders. I need all areas covered by my staff. And ideally the head coach is someone who can like switch between codes, but if they're not and I can find another way to cover those weaknesses, then it's fine too.
Yes.
Whereas people that I don't want people like me, like I don't need that. I'm me, you know,
Yes.
I can do my role. I need people to compensate and to have strengths that they want to invest in further. So that's, I think, a pretty simple philosophy. I don't think that's anything mind blowing, but it's very much bring in all types, find people who have passions that are different to yours, and then hopefully something beautiful comes of it if you're all working towards a common goal, is a very sound way to build a good team, a good business, anything like that.
Like Monty, doesn't it drive you crazy when fans, because fans in the NFL do this every season, they pick a team that's bad and they just say the head coach is an imbecile. But do you know why he got the head coaching job? Because he was probably like the best offensive coordinator on like really good team. The joke is he might be a genius at offense. Yeah. He just doesn't understand the rest of the game, maybe, you know.
Well, you also can't know how good somebody is in a different role.
Exactly.
Try them out in it, you know. A lot of these people are working towards
that. But people try to make it like he was a fraud. It's like, no, he probably was really good at that part. It's just he isn't when he doesn't have someone else do this job.
This applies to Papa. Like Papa's in a different role now as like president of FlyQuest, and as he's stated on this show, he's taken a step back. You know, he has a GM, but your role in it now entails different things than it did before.
It's actually president. It's not just GM. What's the difference? Because that essentially makes you the Leena of FlyQuest.
Yeah, I'm.
That's how I like to think of him.
Or the John Robinson, or whatever you want to call it. I'm like the face and business lead. Yes, correct.
So right, so it's not just in games.
What is your new job for people who don't know?
Trying to make FlyQuest from what they were into the best League of Legends, media, etc. company in the world. Like it's obviously a very, very far away thing from now, but it's making all the low, high level, medium level steps and business culture and hires, etc., to take us from where we were to what we want to be. So it's a very lofty thing. Some days you're lost in the sauce about theory. Some days you're interviewing people and bringing people on, but just trying to set up FlyQuest for success. Because I think the biggest learning I had from 100 Thieves, where they did a lot of things well, is that competitive success in a vacuum doesn't necessarily bring fandom or sponsors or anything like that. You need to capitalize and have a media strategy and really be able to supplement and get people to buy into the players you had. I think we did a really, really poor job with a title and multiple back-to-back finals squad. 100 Thieves of doing that, and those were decisions that were made above my head, and those are things that inform the strategy I want to take with FlyQuest and kind of bringing people into the amazing personalities we have here. So it's much more meaty. There's definitely been plenty of imposter syndrome already, where I'm like, okay, this is how I would have approached it as a general manager and hiring in like the 17, 18 person competitive sphere with mostly young people who I worked with as a counselor before. Now it's a different type of person. Now it's employees and leaders and things like that. How accurate am I going to be at my reads that I was accurate at before? And so far, I've been able to break through the imposter syndrome, but I'm going to make big mistakes and take big risks because I've been given the runway to an investment to build something special here. So if anything happens FlyQuest wise that people like or don't like, it's not all going to be my credit, but it's going to be something that's all under my purview. So I deserve, all of the criticism and I played a hand in all of the good and the bad is kind of the way I look at it.
And you're
the
changing
big brands
the name,
in
right?
Korea. Go on,
changing the name. You're changing the name.
I mean, even if we were, I couldn't tell you. But currently, we have no plans to change the name.
Okay.
The name is so bad, man.
Because the thing is, in Korea, the big brands can even inspire all those fans to come up with trucks. 100 Thieves could barely get one guy on an electric scooter with a pumpkin spice latte to shout something.
I don't want to talk about 100 Thieves, okay? That's the past.
So you bring in Avali, obviously, is like the first big thing, and you release this really fun music video for the roster. So what is Avali supposed to be doing as part of your media strategy, and what else do you have going on?
I think the pitch to her was that both at Riot and G4, she was misused and miscast, obviously most clearly on the LCS, where all of her strengths are around getting personality out of people who aren't naturally going to be great speakers or entertainers, and also kind of like all the broadcast assets that add value that the LEC was ahead on. The LCS had someone who was passionate about, and they were like, no, you're a serious interviewer only. And it's like, okay, well, why are we playing against type? If this was a movie, could be called a miscasting, right? And basically, and then G4, where it seemed like just the bureaucracy kind of took away her ability to innovate. And basically, I came in and said, hey, I think you're great. You've always been great. The leveling up I saw of you, even on the serious side, like the thing that moved me the most was when I did the G4 LCS finals co-stream. I think it was spring 2021. She was on an analyst desk, hosting an analyst desk with Brian Kibler and Broxa. And it was supposed to be like edgy and cringe. Adore was casting with me. I'm saying for the analyst desk.
Oh yeah.
Like analyst desk host wasn't something I assumed that Avali was going to be like super strong on, and it's, hey, let's make it a bit funny and cringe, and it's like, wow, this has a lot of chance to be bad. It's kind of how I looked at it. There wasn't any really a rehearsal or anything, and she actually nailed it. Like she was really like square on. She didn't need a prompter, and like she was able to usher forward a segment that she couldn't do in like the restrictive Riot interview scenario. And I was like, holy shit, even playing against your strengths, you've leveled up a lot. So like she has my respect from that. And so with FlyQuest, it was, hey, here's what we're trying to do. We're going to support you. You only answer to me directly. There's not going to be any diffusing or watering down from having a lot of bureaucracy like there was at G4 Riot. Go and run wild with your first initial project. Let's do some big projects along those lines. We're going to do 2 or 3 big things like that over the year. And also, how can we get you back into the LCS space and doing content with the players and things like that? So it's kind of if you have someone who you've seen claw themselves up multiple times, have strengths, have a lot of creative direction and projects they want to produce, but not people to support them, you don't come in and micromanage them. You say, come over here. I will support you because I trust you. And if we need to rein it in once in a while, I'll help with that. But otherwise, go do your cool shit. That's exactly what your strength is. That's the kind of environment I want to set up for people at FlyQuest as much as possible. So I have a lot of faith in what she's going to be able to do. And as unleashed as we can get away with is going to be the hope for Avali this year.
I mean, I appreciate that from being a boss perspective, is that you enable people, and if they can't swim on their own, then you get rid of them. You know what I mean?
Well, you just choose wisely. Like you and I, even Duncan, if you were in a similar scenario, like we've known these creative types for years and years and years. We know who gets the long rope and then reel them in if you need to. And you know who like, no, I only bring this person if they need to execute very specific deliverables, That's the thing is, if you're a good judge on that, it goes well. If you're a poor judge on it, it goes poorly. And I think that I'm going to be one out of one with Ovally, but again, remains to be seen, right?
I think she deserves it. Anytime that she's been given the resources and creative freedom, I think she's produced some really fun stuff. It may not be
far, so good.
It may not always be my personal cup of tea, but I love her creativity and her own spin, and that she has her own style.
And guess what? If you have an umbrella of content, you can do your cup of tea, and she can do her cup of tea, and
That's
you
true.
can both be hitting new audiences, and that's what we're trying to do, right?
Sure. Do you, outside of Ovally, what are the rest of your plans, or what have you got going in terms of other media?
I think we're still working that out. I think we have some cool stuff that's not announced yet. I already mentioned we're trying to do the LCK Mad Movie thing. I think for us, the mandate right now is we're in League, we're big in League, and we have a couple of Smash players. So let's make sure that we're buttoned up on League. I think in my dream world, people can like build their week around kind of like FlyQuest League of Legends drops, and if we're hitting all the different areas of fandom, then that's like something that would be awesome. It's aspirational and may never come to be. It requires a lot of work, but at the end of the day, putting a really full slate of League of Legends content of different types out there to all types of fans is step one, and then growing that sphere meaningfully in ways that come up. You know, we're lucky enough that we're expanding and hiring and able to take meetings with people rather than, you know, working out who we need to cut. So because of that, there's going to be opportunities that arise that never would have in the past. Just like Prince and Vikla being willing to come to North America was a very unique. We waited in the off season till Europe and North America had ended their off seasons, and there just happened to be amazing high quality players available. The same is true of creators like Ovally after G4 went away, and of other available people in the current kind of economic climate. So it's what risks exist a lot right now. Which ones should we take? That's the part where I earn the big bucks or get the big flames. So we'll see how that goes.
By the way, one thing, since people obviously think we're just picking all the negative things, one thing I do think was a really good thing that they empowered, hopefully, this person to do was I thought that feature that Emily Rand did, where she did the Draw My Life.
It was great. It was so good.
That was very good. That was a really good way to sort of draw people into the highlights of the person's career.
Well, I love it when you play to strengths, right? Like she's someone who likes to do the same way
they took like Dracos' shit and turned it into music at the LEC. Like Emily has these abilities, and it's like finally. I mean, I just know from talking to the LCS casters that they were just like completely shut down by the producers for years when they were pitching these segments. And it's not that the casters didn't want to do these things. It's that they were just constantly told no, and we don't have any resources to do this. And finally, we've gotten to the point where they are actually able to explore this better from a creative perspective. And I love to see that kind of stuff. I think that's one of the most fun things about Emily being on the couch / whatever desk, whatever you're going to call it.
Yeah, I mean, we've all lamented having these great ideas and being told to rein them in or play against type or whatever. And that's the last thing I want to do in an org that I'm running. There will obviously be misses in trying to do that because you'll give somebody too much rope or you'll make a mistake on that. But we've all been talent that's been held back. I'm not going to start holding back people is kind of the way I think about it.
So obviously with the new ownership group, what have you been told to do? Like, what is your mandate with this team?
I mean, I said at the start, it's to go big, it's to win, it's to do media, it's to take what FlyQuest was and the core messages that we have and get them bigger and elevate them. So we're not changing who we are as an org by any means. Obviously, people love us for our sustainability and inclusivity. It's just we want to do sustainability on a bigger stage. We've actually already planted. In 2 weeks, we planted half the amount of trees we planted in 1 year. So, like, obviously, planting a lot of trees and TreeQuest is going to be looking like it's going to be a big slam dunk. And we want to include more people. We want to tell more stories. So I think that's the mandate. Is FlyQuest was doing something novel and had a brand identity that wasn't just we win, which is kind of what C9TL TSM trade, depending on what year it is, and kind of taking that bigger and going further into that and examining what that means on the peripheries is basically the thing there. But yeah, early days, and I try not to speak too much. I try to actually get in there and have the meetings and work out how to do these things because we've all made our careers talkers and talking is easy for us, but actually putting together the empire, which is what you guys are doing with Last Free Nation and fully kind of reaching a vision is much harder. and it's not a natural strength of at least me. And that's what I've been testing myself on recently. Is like, okay, how about I talk less and do more? And the fruits of that have been few and far between so far. Like a good LCS team, hopefully coming on, but hopefully more things to match that intent in the future.
It's definitely a unique brand. Like I heard years ago, Meteos almost joined because he heard all the initiatives were just about trees, and then he found out when he got down to the minutia, though, it wasn't really what he was feeling.
Look, here's what I'm gonna say. I've always loved Meteos. His sense of humor really, really jives with me.
Yeah,
obviously, what happened in 2020 is like something that has like split us for a long, long time since, and I wish we could sit down over a beer and talk about it.
Over some trees.
Yeah. If you're listening, Meteos, just you know, pick up the phone.
The thing is, it's like I still view him positively to this day, and will build him up and enjoy watching his content. But I also was the person who had to be the face of him being let go in the same week he was 2 years previously. Something I was aware of, tried to manage in a different way, nothing I could do about. You know, I'm the face of a really bad thing happening to Will. And that sucks. It sucks that was the role I had to play, but it was my role to play, right? And so now I just have to hold the L infinitely. And if that's the way it has to be, then I have to accept it, right? It's not something easy to accept, but it is.
He was caught in the minutiae of it. He probably couldn't see the wood for the trees.
Even though if
you have glaucoma, apparently it would help you see better. So, you know, it's one of those things, isn't it? You know.
Have we had enough? Can we cut off this show now? What are we doing here?
It's done now. It's done now. Come
on. So yeah, I think we'll probably wrap it up there. For this week, guys. If you want LEC talk, we just did a bunch on Power Spike yesterday. Also, Best Damn League Show has a surprise guest later this week. So the point of having 4 shows, guys, is that we don't have to cover every topic on every show and rehash all of our points.
Yes.
If you want to hear me and Dom get mad at Fnatic, well, you got that yesterday. If you want to hear what teams were excited about going into the group stage, well, you got that yesterday. You can watch the show. It's out on VOD right now. If you want to hear more about the actual matchups in Korea, there was the Monte Wolf show. If you want to hear even more about Europe, there's BDLS, right?
Exactly. We might be a little bit blunt, but in the end, that's a wrap. So